History isn't always about kings, castles, and glory. Sometimes it's about shadows, secrets, and stories the world was never meant to know. From curses that haunted ancient tombs, to plagues that reshaped entire civilizations, to the mysteries of lost worlds like Atlantis, this is where the darkest chapters of humanity are brought back to life. Welcome to Dark History, where the past whispers and the shadows never die. If you're ready to uncover the untold, the terrifying, and the forgotten, you're in the right place. Don't just watch history, experience it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us as we walk together into the darkness of the past. Welcome to Dark History. Chapter 1. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in the autumn of 1922. Beneath the scorching Egyptian sun and the endless golden sands of the Valley of the Kings, one of the most astonishing discoveries in human history was about to unfold. For years, archaeologist Howard Carter had been dismissed, mocked, and even ridiculed for his relentless obsession with finding the lost tomb of a boy king whose reign had been cut short thousands of years before. King Tutankhamun, the child, Pharaoh, had been almost forgotten in the annals of history, overshadowed by greater names like Ramses the Great or Akhenaten. Few believed that his burial chamber had survived the centuries of tomb robbers, natural disasters, and shifting desert sands. Yet Carter was convinced that the boy king's resting place remained hidden, untouched, and waiting to be discovered. He was determined to prove it, no matter the cost. With the backing of his wealthy patron, Lord Carnarvon, Carter and his team began the excavation season that would change history forever. Day after day, men toiled with pickaxes and brushes, their sweat dripping onto the hot limestone ground. Weeks turned into months, and still, there was nothing, just sand, broken stones, and disappointment. By 1922, Lord Carnarvon was ready to abandon the search. The costs had piled up, patience was wearing thin, and the dream of uncovering Tutankhamun's tomb seemed more like a fantasy than a realistic goal. But Carter begged for just one more season, one last chance to dig where no one else dared. Reluctantly, Carnarvon agreed, and fate seemed to smile upon Carter in ways he could never have predicted. On November 4th, a young water boy stumbled across something unusual while running errands at the dig site. The boy had tripped over a buried step, partially revealed beneath the sand. Carter's heart raced when he saw it. A step, carved neatly into the ground, leading downward into the earth. Carefully, the team began to dig. Step after step was revealed, descending deeper into darkness. With each layer of sand cleared, the workers' whispers grew louder. Could it be? Had they finally found what countless others had missed? The Valley of the Kings had been excavated for centuries, its treasures plundered and tombs laid bare. But this was different. The steps seemed untouched, as if they had been waiting for Carter alone. Finally, the stairway ended at a sealed doorway, plastered shut with the royal insignia of the necropolis guards. Carter's hands trembled as he brushed away the last grains of sand. There it wasn't, tacked, unbroken, the mark of the pharaoh still visible after more than 3,000 years. His eyes widened in disbelief. Could this truly be the tomb of Tutankhamun? And if so, had it survived untouched? Carter sent word to Lord Carnarvon immediately, urging him to travel from England to Egypt at once. The moment of truth had come, and the world would soon bear witness. When Carnarvon arrived, anticipation hung heavy in the air. The sealed doorway was carefully breached, revealing a passage filled with rubble and debris. It seemed that someone, perhaps grave robbers centuries earlier, had tried to enter, but Carter noticed something strange. The inner seals remained intact. The chamber beyond had never been opened. Excitement surged through the men as they cleared the passageway. Finally, on November 26, 1922, Carter held up a candle, peering through a tiny hole chiseled in the doorway. As the warm light flickered, illuminating the darkness beyond, he gasped. "Can you see anything?" Carnarvon asked impatiently. Carter's reply would echo through history. "Yes, wonderful things." Inside lay a sight beyond imagination. Golden statues, gilded chariots, ornate furniture, and jewelry glittered in the dim candlelight. The walls seemed alive with treasures that defied belief. No tomb of such grandeur had ever been found in modern times. And yet, there was more. Beyond the treasures, deeper still within the tomb, lay the inner burial chamber. At its heart rested the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun himself, untouched for millennia. Carter and Carnarvon had uncovered a time capsule of the ancient world. perfectly preserved, a glimpse into a forgotten age. But in that moment of triumph, a shadow loomed. Ancient Egyptians had long believed in protecting their kings, even in death, through powerful curses inscribed in tombs, and soon, whispers began to spread. Locals warned Carter's team not to disturb the tomb, for it was said that those who entered would face the wrath of the pharaoh himself. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king's peace. One inscription was rumored to have read. Carter dismissed it as superstition, a relic of primitive fear, but others were not so certain. Within months, strange events began to unfold, events that would give birth to one of the most chilling legends in history, the curse of the Pharaoh. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb would capture the imagination of the entire world. Newspapers hailed it as the greatest archaeological find of the century. Photographers documented every step, and Egypt became the center of global fascination. Yet beneath the glittering treasures and the wonder of the ancient world, something darker stirred. Lord Carnarvon, the man who had financed the search, would soon meet an untimely and mysterious end. Others connected to the excavation would also fall victim to bizarre accidents, sudden illnesses, and unexplained tragedies. Coincidence, or the work of the ancient curse? The line between reality and legend blurred, fueling a story that still haunts us to this day. That this was only the beginning. The sands of Egypt had given up one of its greatest secrets, but it may also have unleashed something far more sinister. As the golden mask of Tutankhamun stared silently from the shadows of his tomb, one question lingered in the air: had mankind gone too far in disturbing the dead? Chapter 2: The First Death. Lord Carnarvon's mysterious end. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb sent shockwaves across the globe. Newspapers called it the find of the century, and for good reason. The sheer opulence of the treasures, untouched for more than 3,000 years, was unlike anything the modern world had ever seen. But behind the excitement and triumph, something darker was brewing. Whispers of an ancient curse began to spread. The locals of Luxor warned Carter and his team not to disturb the sacred resting place of the boy king. For Tutankhamun was not just any pharaoh, he was believed to be under the protection of powerful gods. Many scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as mere superstition meant to scare foreigners. Yet within months of the tomb's opening, one man would fall victim in a manner so chilling that it ignited the legend of the pharaoh's curse. Lord Carnarvon himself. George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was no ordinary aristocrat. He had lived a life of luxury and leisure in England, but his obsession with Egyptology had led him to invest a fortune into Carter's excavations. For years, his faith in Carter had been tested by failure after failure. But in 1922, when Tutankhamun's tomb was revealed in all its glory, Carnarvon's patience had been rewarded 1,000-fold. He basked in the fame and attention, delighted to be at the center of the world's most extraordinary archaeological discovery. Yet, just as quickly as fortune had smiled on him, darkness began to close in. In March of 1923, only a few months after entering the tomb, Lord Carnarvon fell seriously ill. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a simple mosquito bite on his cheek. The hot Egyptian climate was known to bring such nuisances, but within days, the bite became infected, swelling into a painful boil. His health rapidly deteriorated, and soon, he was bedridden with a high fever, struggling to breathe. Doctors were summoned, but their efforts were in vain. On April 5, 1923, Lord Carnarvon died suddenly in Cairo, his body racked with infection and pneumonia. He was just 56 years old. The news of his death spread like wildfire. Around the world, newspapers pounced on the story, and soon, headlines screamed of the curse of the pharaoh. The story grew even stranger when reports emerged of bizarre events that coincided with Carnarvon's death. At the very moment he passed away, all the lights in Cairo were said to have gone out, plunging the city into darkness. Back in England, it was claimed that Carnarvon's beloved dog let out a terrible howl and dropped dead at precisely the same time. Whether these stories were exaggerated or fabricated by journalists eager to sell papers, they only fueled the growing hysteria. Even more chilling was the fact that the infected wound on Carnarvon's cheek was said to have matched the very spot on the golden death mask of Tutankhamun across the left cheek. Coincidence, or something far more sinister? For many, this was undeniable proof that the curse was real. The pharaoh had struck down the man who dared to violate his tomb. Howard Carter, ever the skeptic, refused to believe in curses. He insisted that Carnarvon's death was merely the result of an infection worsened by poor health in Egypt's harsh climate. After all, Carter himself had been in and out of the tomb countless times and was in perfect health. But the world was not convinced. Carter's rational explanations were drowned out by the thrilling allure of a curse that punished those who trespassed against the gods. In the months that followed, more strange incidents occurred. Members of Carter's team, as well as people loosely connected to the excavation, began dying under mysterious or unexpected circumstances. Some succumbed to illness, others to accidents. Each death was seized upon by the press as further evidence of the curse's deadly grip. One man was said to have died from blood poisoning after cutting his hand on an artifact. Another, a wealthy visitor who ignored warnings and entered the tomb, was struck down by a sudden heart attack not long after. The legend grew with every passing month, and soon, the curse of Tutankhamun was no longer just an Egyptian myth, it was a global obsession. What made Carnarvon's death particularly haunting was the eerie timing. He had achieved the pinnacle of success, finally vindicating his years of investment and belief in Carter. And yet, just as he stood at the height of his glory, he was struck down in a way that seemed almost symbolic. His death became the foundation of the curse, the first domino to fall in a chain of mysterious tragedies. Without Carnarvon's untimely end, the legend of the pharaoh's revenge might never have taken root. But with it, the world was enthralled, and the story of the boy king's curse grew into one of the most enduring legends in modern history. As Carter continued his work, meticulously cataloguing the thousands of treasures within the tomb, he could not escape the shadow of the curse. The more he denied it, the more the world believed it. Reporters camped outside the tomb, hungry for new stories of misfortune. Tourists flocked to Luxor, hoping to catch a glimpse of the haunted valley. And all the while, Tutankhamun's golden mask gazed silently from the darkness, as if mocking those who dared to disturb his eternal rest. Lord Carnarvon's death marked the beginning of a mystery that blurred the lines between history and myth. Was it truly a curse that claimed his life, or was it simply the tragic misfortune of a man weakened by illness in a foreign land? The truth may never be known, but one thing was certain: the legend of the pharaoh's revenge had begun, and there was no stopping it. The sands of Egypt had buried Tutankhamun for thousands of years. Now, as his story returned to life, it seemed his spirit would not rest. Quietly, more deaths would follow, more strange occurrences would be recorded, and the curse would tighten its grip on the imagination of the world. Chapter 3: Whispers of the Curse. Media, myth, and mass hysteria. When Lord Carnarvon's death was announced, the world erupted in shock. It wasn't just the passing of a wealthy English lord, it was the manner, the timing, and the ominous shadow it cast over Howard Carter's greatest discovery. Within hours, whispers turned into headlines, and headlines became sensational myths. Newspapers across Europe and America declared, "Pharaoh's curse strikes down Carnarvon." The press loved the story. In a world recovering from the devastation of World War I, people longed for distraction, mystery, and a touch of the supernatural. What better tale than that of a long-dead pharaoh reaching across time to avenge himself on those who had disturbed his sacred tomb? The story practically wrote itself, and journalists wasted no time weaving facts, rumors, and outright inventions into a tapestry of fear and fascination. Reporters dug into every strange detail they could find. They described the exact mosquito bite that killed Carnarvon, linking it to the golden mask of Tutankhamun, where the boy king bore a similar mark. They repeated tales of how the lights in Cairo mysteriously went out the moment of his death. They claimed that Carnarvon's dog, thousands of miles away in England, let out a chilling howl and died at the same instant. Whether true or not didn't matter. These stories captured the imagination of millions, and then came the most damning discovery of all. On the door to Tutankhamun's burial chamber, an inscription was said to have been found, reading, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." The warning was never officially confirmed, and Carter himself denied its existence. But by then it was too late. The curse had a voice, and it was louder than reason. Superstitions in Egypt only added fuel to the fire. Locals had long believed that the tombs of the pharaohs were guarded by ancient spirits and deadly protections left behind to deter grave robbers. Tales of cobras slithering through the Valley of the Kings, of poisoned air trapped inside tombs, and of hidden traps were passed down through generations. For them, Carnarvon's death was no coincidence. It was proof that the ancient king still held power over life and death. As the story spread, every misfortune connected to the excavation was twisted into evidence of the curse. A wealthy visitor to the tomb died suddenly of a heart attack not long after entering. A member of Carter's team succumbed to blood poisoning after handling artifacts. Even random accidents like a car crash involving an American financier loosely tied to the digger claimed to be the pharaoh's revenge. The media frenzy was unstoppable. The London Times, which held exclusive rights to Carter's reports, played down the curse in its articles, attempting to preserve a tone of scientific authority. But rival newspapers saw an opportunity and leaped at it. Sensational stories sold copies, and curses made for irresistible headlines. Soon, tabloids in Europe and the United States churned out lurid tales of ancient magic, restless spirits, and divine wrath. The legend of Tutankhamun's curse became more famous than the discovery of the tomb itself. Even scientists of the time were drawn into the debate. Some argued that Carnarvon's death could be explained by bacteria or mold spores that had been sealed in the tomb for centuries, only to be unleashed when the chamber was opened. Others scoffed at the idea, insisting the curse was nothing more than a clever invention of the press. But for the general public, the truth hardly mattered. The world wanted to believe in the mystery. The hysteria reached such a fever pitch that even those far removed from the excavation found themselves caught in its grip. In England, theatre productions staged dramatic retellings of the curse. Magazines printed illustrations of vengeful pharaohs rising from their sarcophagi to strike down intruders. Spiritualists claimed to hear Tutankhamun's voice in seances warning that more deaths would follow. The story spread like wildfire, igniting a fascination with ancient Egypt that swept through fashion, art, and even architecture. Egyptian motifs appeared in jewelry, clothing, and interior design, all tinged with the mystique of death and curses. Meanwhile, Howard Carter remained steadfast in his denial. To him, the curse was nothing more than an irritating distraction, a sideshow that trivialized his scientific work. He knew the tomb was one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time, a treasure trove that could unlock the secrets of Egypt's forgotten past. Yet, as he continued his painstaking excavation, cataloging every artifact with meticulous care, he could not silence the voices outside the valley. To the world, Tutankhamun's tomb was no longer just a burial site. It was a portal to the supernatural. What made the hysteria so powerful was that it tapped into a primal fear, the idea that the past could reach out and punish the present. Humanity had long respected the dead, fearing what might happen if their rest was disturbed. The story of Tutankhamun's curse was the ultimate warning: cross the line between life and death, and you would pay the price. And yet, the more people feared the curse, the more they were drawn to it. Tourists flocked to Egypt in droves, eager to see the Valley of the Kings, to stand before the tomb that had become both a marvel and a menace. Newspapers couldn't print enough copies. The legend had become bigger than Carter, bigger than archaeology itself. The hysteria was not without its victims. Families of those connected to the excavation found themselves hounded by journalists. Their private grief turned into public spectacle. Every cough, every misfortune, every untimely death was splashed across headlines as proof of the curse. It was a feeding frenzy, and no one could escape it. Still, for all the noise and exaggeration, there was no denying the strange pattern of events. Too many deaths, too many coincidences, too much fear. Was it simply mass hysteria, or was something truly at work in the shadows of Tutankhamun's tomb? The line between myth and reality blurred, and the curse took on a life of its own. By the end of 1923, the world was captivated. Tutankhamun was no longer just a boy king from history. He was a symbol of mystery, danger, and the enduring power of the past. The curse had become immortal, living on in the imaginations of millions. And as more deaths followed, the whispers grew louder. For Howard Carter and his team, the work continued. But the world was no longer watching for the treasures, they were watching for the bodies. Chapter 4. The Domino Effect. Deaths, accidents, and strange occurrences. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was supposed to be the crowning achievement of modern archaeology, a triumph of science over time, a window into an untouched world more than 3,000 years old. But in the years following Lord Carnarvon's mysterious death, the story took a darker turn. What began as whispers of a curse became, for many, undeniable proof. As one by one, Those connected to the excavation met with strange fates. It started subtly. Within months of Carnarvon's passing, people loosely tied to the tomb began to suffer misfortune. Prince Ali Kamal Fahmy Bey, an Egyptian noble who had visited the tomb shortly after its opening, was murdered in London under scandalous circumstances. Although his death had nothing to do with ancient Egypt, the press wasted no time tying it to Tutankhamun's curse. Soon after, George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier, visited the site and was reportedly struck down by a sudden fever. Upon his return home, within days, he was dead. Newspapers quickly declared that the pharaoh's revenge had claimed another victim. The stories piled up. Arthur Mace, a member of Howard Carter's excavation team, fell ill and died from suspected arsenic poisoning. Another Egyptologist, Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who had conducted X-rays on the mummy, also died suddenly after his involvement. Even Lady Evelyn Herbert, Carnarvon's daughter, who had been among the first to enter the tomb, narrowly escaped death on multiple occasions, once in a near-fatal car accident, and later during a severe illness. Each time, people whispered, "The curse is still hunting her." The sense of dread grew as the body count rose. By the late 1920s, at least a dozen deaths had been linked, fairly or not, to Tutankhamun's tomb. None of them were especially strange when examined in isolation, but together they formed a chilling pattern that the public could not ignore. To believers, these were not coincidences, they were warnings. But perhaps the most unnerving case came with the death of Sir Bruce Ingram, a close friend of Howard Carter. Carter had gifted Ingram a paperweight fashioned from a small artifact taken from the tomb, a mummified hand wearing a bracelet inscribed with the words, "Cursed be he who moves my body. To him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." Shortly after, Ingram's house mysteriously burned to the ground. When he rebuilt it, a flood destroyed the property. The chilling sequence of disasters convinced many that Tutankhamun's curse extended beyond Egypt, punishing anyone who dared profit from its treasures. Even the animals seemed to fall victim. A story circulated that Carnarvon's beloved dog, Susie, died suddenly in England at the very moment of his passing in Cairo, howling before collapsing lifeless. Though unverified, the tale was repeated endlessly, reinforcing the eerie sense that something supernatural was at work. That as the years passed, the curse became more than a media sensation. It became a cultural phenomenon. Writers, spiritualists, and occultists claimed the deaths were evidence of powerful ancient magic. Some even suggested that priests had placed protective spells on Tutankhamun's tomb, ensuring that anyone who disturbed the boy king would suffer eternal retribution. The fascination was not limited to the public. Doctors and scientists were drawn into the debate, offering rational explanations. Some argued that the tombs contained toxic molds or bacteria that had lain dormant for centuries, released when the chambers were opened. Spores of Aspergillus or Stachybotrys could, in theory, infect the lungs and cause respiratory failure. Others pointed to arsenic traces in the walls and artifacts. While these theories carried scientific weight, they could not account for the sheer variety of Death Star crashes, fevers, heart attacks, murders. The rational explanations felt incomplete, and the myth of the curse grew stronger. For Howard Carter, the situation was infuriating. As the lead archaeologist, he devoted years to cataloging every item from the tomb with painstaking care. Yet the world seemed less interested in his discoveries than in the deaths surrounding them. Carter himself lived until 1939, dying peacefully, at the age of 64, having never suffered from the so-called curse, but his survival did little to quiet the hysteria. If anything, it added another layer of mystery. Why had the curse spared him? Was he protected by his devotion to the pharaoh, or was he perhaps the chosen messenger of the gods? The more one looked, the stranger the web of coincidences became. Consider this: by 1935, it was estimated that over 20 people linked to the tomb had died unexpectedly. To skeptics, this was hardly extraordinary after all. The excavation spanned decades, involving hundreds of people. Death was inevitable. But to believers, the deaths seemed too tightly clustered, too eerily connected, to be mere chance. The press continued to stoke the fire. Headlines screamed of the curse each time another victim fell. Pharaoh's hand strikes again, one paper declared after another untimely death. By the mid-1930s, the idea of Tutankhamun's curse had become so entrenched in popular culture that even Hollywood could not resist. Films and novels used the legend as inspiration, turning mummies into horror icons and cementing the pharaoh's vengeance in the collective imagination. But beneath the spectacle lay a more unsettling truth, whether real or imagined. The curse had power. It shaped the lives of those who believed in it, created fear in the hearts of the superstitious, and cast a long shadow over one of history's greatest archaeological finds. Even today, nearly a century later, the deaths remain a chilling reminder that some mysteries refuse to be explained away. And as the dominoes continued to fall, a question lingered in the air. Was Tutankhamun's curse simply a myth amplified by hysteria? Or was it a dark truth buried deep beneath the sands of Egypt, waiting to claim its next victim? Chapter 5: Howard Carter's Burden Between Science and Superstition. Howard Carter should have been celebrated as the greatest archaeologist of his age. After all, he had achieved what generations of treasure hunters and scholars had failed to do. He found the intact tomb of a pharaoh, sealed for more than 3 millennia. Tutankhamun's burial chamber was not just a discovery, it was a revelation, a treasure trove that offered scholars unprecedented insight into ancient Egyptian life, art, and belief. But instead of basking in the glory of his achievement, Carter found himself entangled in a storm of superstition, fear, and public hysteria. From the moment Lord Carnarvon died, Carter's life changed. The press no longer asked him about the golden shrines or the breathtaking funerary mask. Instead, journalists wanted to know about curses, omens, and mysterious deaths. Carter despised the rumors, dismissing them as tommyrot. But the more he tried to brush them aside, the more people believed them. To the world, he was no longer simply an archaeologist. He was the man who had unleashed the wrath of an ancient king. At first, Carter tried to ignore it. He threw himself into his work, cataloging the 5,000 artifacts from the tomb. Each item was carefully documented, packed, and shipped to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. But even in the museum halls, whispers of the curse followed him. Local workers muttered prayers under their breath before handling the relics. Some refused to touch certain objects altogether, fearing they carried the pharaoh's vengeance. Behind Carter's stern exterior, the constant rumors began to weigh on him. He was a man of science, trained to value evidence over superstition. Yet, he could not ignore the coincidences piling up. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, dead from blood poisoning. Carnarvon's half-brother, Aubrey Herbert, blind and dying shortly after. Arthur Mace, his trusted colleague, gone too soon. Even strangers who had merely visited the tomb seemed to fall under its shadow. For Carter, each new headline was a bitter reminder that the world wanted mystery, not scholarship. He once wrote in his diary, "The curse, if it exists at all, is man's imagination." Yet late at night, in the solitude of his study, he wondered, could the ancients have truly devised protections for their tombs? Could unseen forces linger around the relics he had disturbed? The Egyptians themselves believed it. Local villagers warned Carter and his team that disturbing a pharaoh's rest would invite disaster. Some even claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky above the Valley of the Kings after the tomb was opened, as if the gods themselves were watching. The priests in nearby temples were not surprised by the death. They saw them as divine justice. To them, Carter was meddling with forces beyond human comprehension. Despite the unease, Carter never wavered publicly. He attended lectures, gave interviews, and dismissed the curse as fantasy. But those who knew him well noticed a change. He became more isolated, more protective of the artifacts. He spent countless hours alone with the treasures, sketching them, examining them, almost as if he was guarding them, not just from thieves, but from something unseen. And then came the bracelet. Carter had discovered among the relics a piece, inscribed with a chilling phrase, "Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the peace of the pharaoh." He claimed it was nothing more than an old funerary saying, but the press seized upon it as evidence of the curse. When news broke that George J. Gould and others had died mysteriously after visiting the tomb, the connection was irresistible. Carter found himself once again at the center of a narrative he could not control. The weight of the curse followed him for the rest of his life. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to risk being associated with the so-called death tomb. Invitations to academic circles dwindled as the legend overshadowed his work. Even when he published his definitive account of the discovery, Readers were less interested in the meticulous details of hieroglyphics or burial rituals than in whether Carter himself would eventually meet a grim end. But he didn't. For all the deaths, all the eerie coincidences, Carter lived nearly 2 decades after opening the tomb. When he died in 1939, it was not from a sudden fever, a mysterious accident, or a tragic curse. It was cancer. To skeptics, his survival proved that the curse was nothing more than sensationalist nonsense. To believers, however, it was proof of something more chilling. Perhaps Carter had been chosen, spared by Tutankhamun himself, allowed to disturb the tomb, because he had become its guardian in the modern age. In the end, Carter was both triumphant and haunted. He had brought Tutankhamun back into the light of history, but at the cost of his own peace of mind. His name would forever be tied not just to the boy king's treasures, but to the shadows of a curse that refused to die. And so, Carter's burden became more than the logistics of excavation or the preservation of artifacts. It became the endless battle between science and superstition, between history and myth. And in that battle, one truth emerged: sometimes, the stories we fear hold more power than the facts we know. Chapter 6: The Pharaoh's Message. Ancient Beliefs in Life, Death, and the Afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end. It was a transformation, a passage into a realm where the soul continued its journey. To truly understand the legend of Tutankhamun's curse, one must first step into the beliefs that shaped his world, a civilization where life and death were threads woven tightly together, and where the tomb was not a grave but a gateway to eternity. The Egyptians believed that each human was made up of several spiritual parts: the Ka, the life force; the Ba, the soul that could travel between realms; and the Ark, the immortal spirit that endured in the afterlife. When a pharaoh died, these parts needed to be preserved and protected, so that the king could live forever among the gods. The body was embalmed, the tomb filled with offerings, and spells were recited to safeguard the journey. To disturb this balance was to risk chaos, not just for the dead, but for the living. This was the foundation of their elaborate burial rituals. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells, prayers, and incantations, was placed within tombs. As a kind of spiritual map, it instructed the deceased on how to navigate the dangers of the underworld: rivers of fire, monstrous serpents, and gods who weighed the purity of the heart against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth. To fail these tests meant annihilation. To succeed meant eternal life in the field of reeds, a paradise of abundance and peace. Tutankhamun's tomb reflected this vision. The golden mask was not merely decoration, it was a protective shield, inscribed with spells to guard his spirit. The canopic jars, holding his organs, were sealed with protective deities. Even the placement of the treasure shields, weapons, chariots spoke of a journey beyond death, equipping the young king with all he might need in the next world. To the Egyptians, these were not relics of art. They were living protections. They were powered. So when Carter and his team pried open the doors to the burial chamber, they were not merely uncovering history, they were trespassing into a sacred realm. Every hieroglyph carved into the walls, every amulet hidden in the wrappings, carried a message: the king is not gone, he is waiting. And if anyone disturbed that waiting, divine retribution could follow. The idea of a curse, then, was not so far-fetched in Egyptian thought. Inscriptions on other tombs warn intruders of dire fates: blindness, madness, even death. One reads, "All men who shall enter this tomb impure will meet with the serpent that strikes and the crocodile that waits." Such warnings were both spiritual and practical deterrents against tomb robbers. But for the Egyptians, they were not metaphors, they were promises. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler in life, he was divine, a bridge between mortals and gods. His death elevated him further, transforming him into a being of immense spiritual power. To desecrate his resting place was to strike against the gods themselves. In this worldview, the deaths surrounding Tutankhamun's tomb would not have been coincidences, but justice, a reminder that no mortal hand could disturb what was meant to remain untouched. And yet, there is another layer to this belief, a psychological one. Fear is a powerful force. When whispers of a curse spread, the imagination does the rest. People began to see patterns where none existed, to attribute every tragedy to Tutankhamun's vengeance. But perhaps that was the true brilliance of the Egyptian tomb inscriptions. They planted fear in the hearts of intruders, and fear itself became the weapon. But what of Tutankhamun himself? a boy king who reigned for less than a decade, he became a symbol of something far greater in death than he ever was in life. His tomb was smaller than those of great pharaohs before him, suggesting his burial was rushed, perhaps unexpected, yet the care with which his body was prepared, and the riches that surrounded him, show the weight of belief in his divine role. Even in youth, he was bound to the eternal cycle of kingship, a cycle guarded fiercely by the gods. It is possible that Tutankhamun's message, preserved through ritual and symbol, was this: the king is eternal, and so is his power. Whether through spells, amulets, or fear, the Egyptians ensured that no one could forget this truth. And for thousands of years, no one did. His tomb remained sealed, his body untouched, his treasures preserved. It was only in 1922 that Carter's team disturbed its silence, and the ripple effects are still felt today. The pharaoh's message then was not just for his people, but for anyone who dared to challenge the sanctity of death. It was a reminder that some doors, once closed, are not meant to be opened. And perhaps that is why the story of the curse endures, because deep down, we still sense the weight of those ancient beliefs, and we still fear the power of the dead. Chapter 7. The Strange Deaths, Coincidence or Curse. When Howard Carter first broke the seal to Tutankhamun's tomb in November of 1922, the world was dazzled. Headlines spoke of glittering treasures, a boy king reborn from history, and the triumph of modern archaeology. Yet, in the shadows of those celebrations, a darker story began to take shape, one that would transform Tutankhamun's discovery into one of the most chilling legends in history. For within months of the opening, people began to die. The most famous case was that of Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy British aristocrat who had financed the expedition. In March 1923, only a few months after the tomb was opened, Carnarvon suffered a mosquito bite while shaving. The bite became infected, leading to blood poisoning. He lingered for days before dying in Cairo at the age of 56. Newspapers seized on the death immediately, calling it the first victim of the pharaoh's curse. Some even reported that at the very hour of his death, the lights in Cairo mysteriously went out. Others claimed his dog, thousands of miles away in England, howled and collapsed dead at the same time. Coincidence or something far darker? Carnarvon's death was only the beginning. Soon after, more strange tragedies followed. George J. Gould, an American financier who visited the tomb in 1923, fell sick almost immediately after entering and died of pneumonia within weeks. Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey of Egypt, who had also toured the site, was murdered by his wife in a bizarre scandal not long after. Colonel Aubrey Herbert, Carnarvon's half-brother, died the same year following complications from dental surgery. The list of deaths began to grow, each one adding fuel to the legend of Tutankhamun's wrath. Perhaps the most unsettling was the case of Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who x-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy before it was unwrapped. Within a year, he was dead. Then there was Arthur Mace, one of Carter's trusted colleagues, who fell mysteriously ill in 1928 and never recovered. Even Sir Lee Stack, Governor-General of Sudan, who had ties to the excavation, was assassinated in Cairo. These events seemed to form a chilling pattern. Those who touched the tomb, in one way or another, met untimely ends. The press played its part in amplifying the fear. British newspapers especially found the curse irresistible, weaving tales of ancient magic and divine vengeance. They printed stories of inscriptions supposedly found in the tomb, curses that warned of death on swift wings to anyone who disturbed the king's rest. Though no such curse was actually inscribed in Tutankhamun's burial chamber, the rumor spread like wildfire. Fear became fact in the public imagination, and soon, even rational minds began to wonder, was there truly something at work beyond coincidence? Howard Carter himself, strangely enough, seemed immune. He lived for nearly 2 decades after the discovery, dying peacefully in 1939. This puzzled believers in the curse. Some suggested Carter had been protected by the gods for his role as the tomb's chosen discoverer. Others argued that perhaps the curse was selective, punishing financiers, visitors, and outsiders, but sparing the archaeologist himself. Skeptics, of course, offered rational explanations. Egypt in the 1920s was rife with diseases like malaria and typhoid. Hygiene during expeditions was poor, and medical care was limited. Lord Carnarvon's infected mosquito bite could easily be explained as a tragic accident, worsened by the hot Egyptian climate. The deaths of Gould, Mace, and others could be attributed to exhaustion, infection, or sheer bad luck. Yet skeptics struggled to explain the pattern. How could so many connected to the tomb die so suddenly, so mysteriously? Was it chance or was it something deeper? Some scientists in later years suggested a natural explanation. Toxic mold or bacteria sealed within the tomb for thousands of years. When disturbed, spores of Aspergillus nigra or Aspergillus flavus could have been inhaled, weakening immune systems or causing fatal infections. This theory gained traction, particularly since many of the deaths involved respiratory illnesses. Yet it, too, failed to fully explain why Carter and others who spent the most time in the tomb survived. For believers in the curse, however, none of this mattered. What mattered was the chilling sequence of misfortunes, deaths, accidents, even suicides, all tied by one common thread: the boy king who had been disturbed. To them, it was not coincidence but consequence. Tutankhamun's spirit, wronged and restless, demanded vengeance. The most powerful stories came not just from the victims, but from the whispers that surrounded them. Cairo itself buzzed with rumors. Locals warned that the pharaoh's tombs should never be touched, that the gods had long memories. Some Egyptian workers on the dig reportedly refused to enter the burial chamber after the first deaths. Even in London, far from the Valley of the Kings, people whispered that mummies brought misfortune. Museums received letters begging them to return artifacts to Egypt, lest the curse spread further. Over time, the legend grew larger than the deaths themselves. Even today, historians argue over the exact number of supposed victims. Some say 9, others claim 27. The truth is clouded by rumor, exaggeration, and the sensational journalism of the 1920s. Yet, what cannot be denied is this: the curse of Tutankhamun captured the world's imagination in a way no archaeological find ever had before. It turned a tomb into a global legend. It gave a boy king, long forgotten, a legacy darker and more enduring than his short reign. Whether one believes the curse or not, the psychological impact was undeniable. Each new death reinforced the fear. Each coincidence wove a tighter thread. In an age where science was advancing but superstition still lingered, Tutankhamun's curse became the perfect story: mysterious, terrifying, irresistible. And behind it all lay a chilling question that still lingers today: was it mere chance, or did the pharaoh truly reach from beyond the grave? Chapter 8: The Mummy's Gaze, Ancient Omens and Modern Pharaohs. The story of Tutankhamun's curse spread across the globe. A strange fascination with the mummy's gaze began to take root in the collective imagination. Too many, the deaths connected with the tomb were not just accidents, but warning signs that the pharaoh's spirit was watching, his wrath extending beyond the Valley of the Kings. And the idea of being watched by the long-dead boy king became one of the most haunting elements of the legend. When Howard Carter finally opened Tutankhamun's stone sarcophagus in 1925, what lay within astonished the world. Layer upon layer of gilded shrines were removed until the innermost coffin's gold was revealed. Nestled inside was the mummy itself, adorned with jewels and the now iconic golden mask. But it wasn't just treasure that caught the attention of those present. It was the eyes of the mask, wide, unblinking, and perfectly crafted to resemble life. They seemed to follow every movement in the room. For the Egyptians of the past, this was intentional. To them, the eyes of a funerary mask were not merely decoration. They were portals, allowing the soul of the deceased to see into the world of the living. Reporters covering the discovery picked up on this detail immediately. Articles began to speak of the boy king's gaze haunting those who disturbed him, as though his spirit stared out from behind the mask, recording every trespasser. Superstition grew with each retelling. Visitors whispered that when they looked into the mask's eyes, they felt as though something ancient and heavy pressed down upon their souls. Even some of Carter's colleagues admitted to feeling uneasy. Under that watchful stare, the press, hungry for sensational headlines, began weaving tales that blurred fact and fiction. They described the mask's eyes glowing faintly in the torchlight, watching intruders with judgment. Some even claimed that those who stared too long into them began to suffer nightmares, illnesses, or worse. Though unverified, these stories only heightened the atmosphere of fear that surrounded the tomb. The pharaoh, it seemed, was not silent. His gaze was active, his warning clear. It wasn't just in Egypt that this fear spread. In London, where artifacts from the tomb were exhibited, Museum staff spoke of eerie experiences. Guards claimed they felt invisible eyes following them through the darkened halls at night. Patrons fainted unexpectedly, swearing they had seen the mask blink or shift. The legend of the mummy's gaze crossed oceans, becoming a global obsession. Tutankhamun's face, once forgotten in the sands of time, was now immortalized as the very image of ancient vengeance. Scholars tried to rationalize the phenomenon. Psychologists argued that the power of suggestion was at work. Once people believed in the curse, every strange sensation, a flicker of torchlight, a sudden chill, a feeling of being watched became evidence of it. Fear shaped reality. Others suggested that the highly polished obsidian and quartz in the mask's eyes were deliberately designed to create the illusion of movement, an ancient technique meant to give the mask lifelike intensity. To the ancient Egyptians, this was a way of ensuring that the dead remained present. To modern audiences, however, it was proof of a curse. And then there were the so-called omens, strange coincidences that seemed to echo the pharaoh's watchful presence. One account claimed that a cobra, the symbol of Egyptian royalty, broke into Carter's home the very night the tomb was opened and devoured his pet canary. To Egyptians, the cobra represented Wadjet, the protector of the king. Was this a sign that Tutankhamun's spirit was defending itself, or was it simply an unfortunate accident twisted by superstition? The story, like so many others, was repeated endlessly, each retelling adding new layers of menace. The fear of the mummy's gaze even bled into popular culture. By the mid-1920s and 1930s, films, novels, and pulp magazines were filled with tales of cursed mummies that came to life when disturbed. Hollywood eagerly embraced the legend, producing horror films that painted Egypt as a land of dark secrets and restless spirits. The image of the mummy wrapped in linen, eyes glowing with vengeance, became a staple of cinema. And at the heart of it all was the true story of Tutankhamun, the boy whose eyes, whether real or imagined, seemed to pierce through time. But there was also a deeper truth hidden within the fear. To the ancient Egyptians, the dead were never truly gone. The concept of the Kiye, the life force, meant that the soul lingered, watching and interacting with the living. The funerary mask of Tutankhamun was not just a work of art. It was a vessel of power. For Egyptians, this was sacred and necessary. For outsiders in the 1920s, it became terrifying. What was meant as reverence was twisted into a curse. Even Carter himself was not immune to the unease. Though he remained publicly skeptical of the curse, his private writings occasionally revealed moments of doubt. He described the tomb as a place of overwhelming presence, where one always felt observed. Some speculated that this was merely the weight of history pressing on him. Others believed that even Carter, the man who claimed to fear nothing, was touched by the pharaoh's gaze. As the years passed, the fear did not diminish. Every new death or tragedy linked to the tomb was framed as another victim claimed by the unseen eyes of Tutankhamun. Whether it was a heart attack, an accident, or an illness, the curse was always blamed. To those who believed, the boy king had not only protected his resting place but had also ensured that the world would never forget him. And indeed, they never did. Tutankhamun's gaze, whether through the haunting beauty of his golden mask, or through the shadow of fear cast by those who died, remains one of the most enduring symbols of the ancient world. To this day, millions visit his treasures in museums, and countless more stare at photographs of the mask, and many still whisper the same question asked a century ago: when you look into those eyes, is it only history you see, or is the pharaoh still watching you? Chapter 9. Secrets in the Sand. Hidden warnings in the Valley of the Kings. The Valley of the Kings is more than just a burial ground. It is a labyrinth of secrets, carved into the desert cliffs by men who believed they were building eternal homes for gods in human form. For centuries, this valley remained a place of reverence, where whispers carried on the hot winds and shadows seemed longer than they should be. To disturb it was to invite the wrath of the past. And when Howard Carter uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, many believed that he had stepped into a world where ancient warnings were written not only in hieroglyphs but in the very sand beneath his feet. Before Tutankhamun's tomb was even opened, whispers of danger surrounded the valley. Local workers, who had grown up among these cliffs, told stories passed down from their ancestors, tales of spirits that guarded the tombs, of curses carved in forgotten chambers, and of misfortune that followed those who lingered too long in the valley at night. While Western archaeologists dismissed these accounts as superstition, The locals knew better. The Valley of the Kings was alive in ways outsiders could never understand. One of the most chilling elements often overlooked in the story of the curse is the graffiti left by ancient workers themselves. On the walls of other tombs in the valley, archaeologists have found warnings etched into the stone, phrases like, "Death will come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Whether meant as ritual protection or as a genuine deterrent, these words carried an ominous weight. Though Carter insisted Tutankhamun's tomb contained no such inscription, the legend spread quickly that one had been found and concealed. Newspapers, hungry for drama, claimed that the curse was real, citing these warnings as proof. Even without explicit inscriptions, the tomb itself seemed to whisper danger. The entrance was sealed with cords of necropolis wax, stamped with the jackal of Anubis, the god of the dead. To those who entered, this was not just decoration, which was a divine warning. Breaking that seal, some argued, was not just an act of archaeology, but an act of defiance against the gods themselves. And then came the omens, strange and unsettling, that began to pile up even before the tomb was fully explored. Workers reported sudden collapses of sand that nearly buried them alive, as though the earth itself resisted their progress. Tools vanished only to be found buried deep in the dust, as if swallowed by the valley. Some claimed to hear whispers echoing through the shafts at night, voices speaking in a language no one could recognize. Skeptics dismissed these as imagination, but for those who believed in the curse, these were the Pharaoh's guardians, warning them to turn back. The death of Lord Carnarvon, just months after the tomb's discovery, only added fuel to the fire. The story of his passing was retold endlessly: a mosquito bite that turned septic, his sudden collapse in Cairo, and the chilling coincidence that the lights in the city went out at the very moment of his death. Reports claimed that back in England, his beloved dog let out a mournful howl and died instantly. For believers in the curse, these were not coincidences, they were messages. The valley had spoken, and Carnarvon had paid the price for trespassing. But it wasn't just Carnarvon. A string of strange deaths followed in the years after the tomb's opening. Arthur Mace, a member of Carter's team, died mysteriously. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who had x-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy, passed away. Soon after, even George J. Gould, an American millionaire who visited the tomb, fell ill and died within days of leaving Egypt. Each tragedy was woven into the legend, each name another tally in the pharaoh's revenge. What made the curse so powerful was not just the deaths themselves, but the setting in which they occurred. The Valley of the Kings was, and still is, an unforgiving place. Temperatures soar by day and plummet by night. The cliffs loom like jagged teeth, and the silence is suffocating. To walk there is to feel the weight of centuries pressing down. When accidents or illnesses struck, it was easy to believe that something supernatural was at work. The environment amplified the fear. Yet beyond superstition, there may have been a hidden truth buried in the sands. Modern science has suggested that the tombs of Egypt, sealed for millennia, may have contained deadly mold spores or toxic bacteria that could harm those who entered. To the ancient mind, such dangers would have been understood as curses, and so warnings were carved into stone to protect the living. In the Valley of the Kings, science and superstition merged into one. Despite this, archaeologists pressed on. Carter himself scoffed at the idea of a curse, determined to finish his work. But even he could not ignore the unease that hung over his team. In his diary, he described the valley at night as a place of whispering shadows, where the wind seemed to carry voices from the tombs. Whether this was imagination or something more, the sense of being watched never left him. The legend of the Pharaoh's revenge took on a life of its own. Newspapers in London, New York, and Paris ran sensational stories, painting the valley as a place where ancient gods still held dominion. Readers devoured every word, their fascination with Egypt deepened by fear. The idea that an ancient king could reach across 3,000 years to strike down his enemies was irresistible. It made the discovery not just an archaeological triumph, but a dark mystery that blurred the line between history and horror. And perhaps that is the true secret hidden in the sands of the Valley of the Kings, the power of belief. Whether one views the curse as real or as myth, its influence cannot be denied. It shaped the way people saw the tomb, the way they remembered Tutankhamun, and the way Egypt was etched into popular culture. The valley became more than a burial ground. It became a stage where the past and present collided, where fear was as enduring as stone, Even today, when tourists walk among the tombs, they speak in hushed tones. Guides warn against lingering too long, and many admit to feeling an eerie presence, as though unseen eyes watch from the shadows. The Valley of the Kings is still a place of secrets, and its warnings, whether carved into walls, whispered by locals, or carried on the desert wind, remain as powerful now as they were thousands of years ago. Tutankhamun's tomb may have been the spark, but the curse is older than him, older than Carter, older than any single pharaoh. It is the legacy of a land where the dead are never silent, and where the sands themselves seem to hold memory. Those who enter the valley may leave with treasures, photographs, or stories, but many leave with something else too, the unshakable sense that the past has seen them, and will not forget. Chapter 10. The Pharaoh's Wrath in Popular Culture. From headlines to Hollywood, when Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon uncovered the sealed tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, they did more than reveal the treasures of a forgotten boy king. They unleashed a story that would echo far beyond the sands of Egypt, a story of curses, revenge, and death that would captivate the modern imagination. What began as an archaeological triumph became a cultural phenomenon. The curse of the pharaohs slipped effortlessly from scholarly debates into headlines, novels, plays, and eventually Hollywood blockbusters. In many ways, Tutankhamun became less a historical figure and more a mythological one, a king reborn not through resurrection, but through popular culture. The transformation started almost immediately after the discovery. When Lord Carter died in April 1923, newspapers seized the story with a frenzy. Instead of focusing on the treasures or Carter's meticulous work, the press leaned heavily into superstition. Headlines screamed of a deadly curse. Reporters claimed that Carter's canary had been eaten by a cobra, the symbol of Egyptian royalty, on the very day the tomb was opened. They reported strange illnesses, accidents, and eerie coincidences. The Western world, already fascinated by Egyptology, found itself enchanted by something far darker, the idea that the ancient dead could still reach out to punish the living. Sensationalism sold. The curse became front-page news in London, New York, and Paris. For a world still reeling from World War I, the Spanish flu, and widespread uncertainty, the story of an ancient curse offered both escapism and fear. It was a drama that mixed archaeology with the supernatural, science with myth, and fact with rumor. In that fusion, the Pharaoh's Wrath was reborn as one of the most enduring legends of the modern age. Writers and artists wasted no time in capitalizing on the craze. In the 1920s and 30s, novels, pulp magazines, and stage plays used Egyptian curses as thrilling backdrops for tales of adventure. The imagery of desert sands, haunted tombs, and vengeful pharaohs became a staple of Gothic fiction. The curse provided the perfect metaphor for Western anxieties about colonialism, science, and the consequences of disturbing forces best left alone. Hollywood soon followed. In 1932, Universal Studios released The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff as Imhotep, a cursed high priest who returns from the dead. Though the story bore little resemblance to Tutankhamun's life, it was directly inspired by the hysteria surrounding the tomb. Karloff's wrapped figure, rising slowly from his sarcophagus, became an iconic image, forever linking mummies with horror. The film's success cemented the idea of Egypt as a land of dark magic and restless spirits in the Western imagination. Through film, the legend of the curse took on a life of its own. Subsequent movies portrayed pharaohs as sorcerers, tombs as traps, and archaeologists as both heroes and victims. In each retelling, the Valley of the Kings became not just a burial site, but a stage for supernatural vengeance. By the mid-20th century, the curse had become a cultural shorthand for the dangers of tampering with the past. But it wasn't only in fiction that the Pharaoh's Wrath lived on. The curse seeped into popular music, art, and even advertising. Jazz songs of the 1920s referenced Tutankhamun, using his name as a symbol of mystery and allure. Cartoons caricatured the mummy's curse for laughs, while luxury brands used Egyptian imagery to sell perfumes and jewelry. Tutankhamun's mask, with its golden face and serene gaze, became one of the most reproduced images in the world. Ironically, the boy king who had been forgotten for millennia was now everywhere, his likeness immortalized in everything from postcards to comic books. The fascination with the curse reflected a deeper cultural tension. On one hand, people admired the achievements of ancient Egypt, its monuments, its art, its sophistication. On the other hand, they feared its otherness, its mysteries, its defiance of time. The curse became a way to grapple with that tension. Story that acknowledged the awe of discovery while reminding people of the danger of hubris. To disturb the dead, the legend warned, was to invite consequences. Even scientists and medical professionals found themselves drawn into the debate. When more members of Carter's team died in the years following the tomb's opening, newspapers tallied the numbers like a grim scorecard. Was this coincidence, or something more? Explanations ranged from psychological stress to exposure to ancient bacteria. Though science offered plausible reasons, the public clung to the supernatural. After all, science could explain the how, but the curse explained the why. As decades passed, the pharaoh's revenge became more than just a news story. It became folklore, a modern myth, as potent as those of ancient Greece or Norse legend. The idea that Tutankhamun's tomb carried a curse was repeated so often that it blurred into accepted truth for many. The irony, of course, is that Howard Carter himself lived for years after the discovery, dying peacefully in 1939. But the fact did little to weaken the curse's grip on the imagination. People wanted to believe. In the latter half of the 20th century, the legend found new life through global exhibitions. When Tutankhamun's treasures toured museums in the 1970s, millions flocked to see them. The media once again highlighted the curse, warning of dangers that awaited those who viewed the artifacts. Attendance skyrocketed. The promise of both beauty and danger drew crowds like moths to flame. The curse, whether real or not, was a marketing force unlike any other. Hollywood revisited the theme in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, with films like The Mummy, 1999, and its sequels, reimagining Egypt as a playground of curses, undead warriors, and lost treasures. Video games, television shows, and novels, all borrowed from the same well. Each new adaptation reshaped the curse, modernizing it for new audiences, but never abandoning its core idea that the dead of Egypt still hold power over the living. The cultural impact of Tutankhamun's curse reveals more about us than it does about him. We, as humans, are drawn to mystery, to danger, to the thin veil between life and death. The pharaoh's revenge taps into a primal fear, the idea that actions have consequences, and that some boundaries should never be crossed. It is, at its heart, a story about respect for history, for the unknown, and for forces beyond our control. Even now, a century after the tomb's discovery, the curse remains alive. It appears in documentaries, podcasts, and online forums. Some dismiss it as superstition, while others insist it is real. But regardless of belief, the curse endures, woven into our collective imagination. It is no longer just about Tutankhamun. It is about the human need for stories that explain the unexplainable, that turn coincidence into destiny, and that make history feel alive, dangerous, and immediate. The pharaoh's wrath may not be carved into stone, but it is etched into the culture of the modern world. From headlines to Hollywood, from pulp novels to blockbuster films, the curse has transcended its origins to become one of the most enduring legends of our time. And in that sense, perhaps the pharaoh truly did achieve immortality, not through the afterlife he sought, but through the fear and fascination he continues to inspire in us all. Chapter 11. Science versus Superstition. The hidden explanations behind the curse. From the moment Lord Carnarvon died in 1923, whispers of the pharaoh's curse spread like wildfire across the world. Was it truly the wrath of Tutankhamun, or was there another explanation lurking in the shadows? For decades, scientists, doctors, and skeptics have tried to pull back the veil of superstition, examining whether the so-called curse was nothing more than science misunderstood. Yet, the deeper they dig, the more unsettling the answers become, answers that often blur the line between rational fact and terrifying possibility. At first glance, the simplest explanation is coincidence. After all, not every member of Howard Carter's team died mysteriously. In fact, Carter himself lived nearly 2 decades after the tomb was opened. Several others also survived well into old age. If a deadly curse were real, why didn't it strike them all? Statisticians argue that, in a group as large as Carter's, some untimely deaths were bound to occur. Carnarvon's fatal mosquito bite and ensuing infection could easily be explained by poor medical care in the 1920s, not divine punishment. But even as reason offered calm explanations, superstition offered a far more thrilling one, one public was eager to believe. Still, science did not dismiss the curse entirely. Doctors began to investigate whether the tomb itself harbored dangers. Some suggested that ancient bacteria or toxic mold could have survived in the sealed chamber for thousands of years. When Carter and his team broke the seal, they may have inhaled spores or microbes dormant since antiquity. This theory gained traction in the 1960s and 70s, when researchers began finding molds such as Aspergillus flavus in Egyptian tombs. The mold produces aflatoxins, compounds that can cause serious respiratory infections, liver damage, or even death. Could this biological curse explain why Carnarvon and others fell ill so quickly? Others expanded on this idea, pointing to the unique environment of a tomb. In a dark, sealed space, devoid of fresh air, molds and bacteria could flourish. The sudden disturbance might release clouds of invisible killers, much like opening an ancient Pandora's box. This explanation seemed to straddle the line between myth and science. Yes, there was no mystical energy at work, but wasn't it even more chilling to imagine that Tutankhamun's tomb carried death in microscopic form, waiting patiently for centuries to strike down the intruder? But even the microbial theory raised doubts. Modern analyses of the mummies themselves show limited evidence of pathogens capable of widespread illness. Moreover, Carter himself spent countless hours inside the tomb without ever falling ill. Could it be that the curse selectively targeted only some individuals? Or was this simply the human tendency to notice patterns where none exist? Psychologists have offered yet another explanation: the power of suggestion. Known as the nocebo effect, the dark twin of the placebo effect. This phenomenon occurs when a person's belief in danger produces real physical symptoms. In the frenzy of 1920s media, the world became convinced that anyone who disturbed the tomb was doomed. Imagine the weight of that belief pressing on the minds of Carnarvon's peers. Every cough, every fever, every ache could feel like the first strike of the curse. Fear alone, doctors argue, may have accelerated illness or even triggered fatal conditions in some already vulnerable individuals. Skeptics lean heavily on this explanation. The curse, they argue, was a social construct, a story so powerful that it shaped reality. When newspapers endlessly printed tales of death and doom, when rumors of cobras, collapsing walls, and ancient maledictions spread, the legend became self-fulfilling. In this view, the pharaoh's revenge wasn't supernatural at all. It was psychological warfare, an idea so strong it could kill. Yet, even skeptics cannot fully explain away the chilling coincidences. Take for instance, Carnarvon's beloved dog, who supposedly let out a piercing howl and dropped dead at the exact hour of his master's death, or the fact that the electricity in Cairo failed the moment Carnarvon died, plunging the city into darkness. Rational explanations exist, of course, but when stacked together, these events form a pattern eerily consistent with a curse narrative. Coincidence alone begins to feel inadequate. Anthropologists add another layer, suggesting that the curse was never meant to be real, but symbolic. Ancient Egyptians often inscribed warnings on tombs, cautioning that anyone who disturbed the dead would be punished by gods or spirits. These curses served a psychological and cultural purpose. They were deterrents, designed to scare away grave robbers. Ironically, when Carter uncovered Tutankhamun's tomb, no such curse inscription was found, but the Western press, steeped in Gothic imagination, invented one anyway. In doing so, they brought an ancient warning to life, not because the Egyptians intended it, but because modern audiences wanted it. Even today, modern forensic science continues to probe the mystery. In 2002, German scientists examined air samples from other Egyptian tombs and discovered dangerous concentrations of bacteria and fungi, including Staphylococcus and Pseudomonas. These microbes can cause severe infections, particularly in those with compromised immune systems. It is not hard to imagine how a mosquito bite, left untreated, could spiral into a fatal infection in such an environment. For some, this was the final nail in the coffin of superstition. The curse was nothing more than biology. Yet, for others, the findings only made the curse feel more real. Wasn't it more terrifying to think that death lay in the very air of the tomb, silent and unseen, like an invisible spell cast by the dead? The debate between science and superstition reflects a deeper truth about human nature. We crave explanations that satisfy both logic and imagination. A scientific answer might explain how Carnarvon died, but the curse explains why. Science offers facts, the curse offers meaning, and in times of fear, meaning often matters more than fact. This tension plays out not just in archaeology, but in our broader relationship with the past. When we unearth ancient ruins, we confront both history and myth. The curse of Tut embodies that confrontation. It reminds us that the past is not inert. It exerts power over us not through magic, but through memory, culture, and story. Every attempt to explain away the curse only strengthens its hold, because even the rational explanations feel uncanny. Microbes, molds, and psychology may be natural, but they remain terrifying forces when framed as instruments of an ancient king's vengeance. A century after the tomb's discovery, scientists are still investigating, and believers are still insisting. Neither side can claim absolute victory, because the curse exists in a liminal space where fact and fiction overlap. It is both real and unreal, both science and superstition. To deny it entirely is to miss its power. To believe it fully is to surrender reason to myth. The truth, perhaps, lies in the uneasy balance between the two. In the end, whether explained by microbes, psychology, or sheer chance, the story of the curse persists because it satisfies a universal human hunger, the desire to see meaning in mystery. Tutankhamun may have been a boy king whose reign was brief and unremarkable, but in death, he became a symbol of humanity's struggle to reconcile logic with legend. The Pharaoh's curse is not simply a relic of the past, it is a mirror reflecting our own fears, beliefs, and need for stories that bridge the gap between the known and the unknowable. Chapter 12. The Media's Role. How the Press Fed the Pharaoh's Curseway. Howard Carter cracked open the sealed door of Tutankhamun's tomb in November 1922. He unleashed not just the treasures of a forgotten pharaoh, but a storm of stories that would sweep across the globe. The discovery was extraordinary on its own: an intact royal tomb, untouched for over 3,000 years. But it was not only the golden mask, jeweled daggers, and glittering coffins that captivated the world. It was the whispers of doom, the rumors of curses, and the chilling belief that anyone who disturbed the boy king's rest would suffer a terrible fate. These whispers, magnified by the press, transformed archaeology into Gothic spectacle and turned Tutankhamun into a symbol of death as much as rebirth. The 1920s were a golden age for newspapers. Competition was fierce, headlines were bold, and sensationalism was the engine that drove circulation. When Carnarvon, the wealthy English aristocrat who funded Carter's expedition, died in April 1923, the press had its hook. Here was the perfect story: a mysterious tomb, a dead benefactor, and ancient Egyptian warnings of divine vengeance. The first report came from Cairo, where correspondents rushed to connect Carnarvon's death to the pharaoh's wrath. Within hours, newspapers from London to New York carried headlines like "Pharaoh's Curse Kills Explorer" and "Death Comes to Those Who Disturb the Tomb." It didn't matter that no inscription of a curse had ever been found in tomb. The press didn't need fact, they needed drama. Journalists invented quotes, exaggerated details, and even fabricated events to feed their readers' hunger for the supernatural. One report claimed that when Carter opened the tomb, a cobra slithered into his house and devoured his Canarian omen of death. Another suggested that a mysterious hieroglyph had been translated as a direct threat: "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Neither story was true, but that hardly mattered. The myth of the curse was more powerful than the reality of the excavation. The press also played on deep-rooted Western fascination with Egypt. Since the 19th century, Europe and America had been gripped by Egypt. The pyramids, mummies, and hieroglyphs fascinated the public, who saw Egypt as both exotic and dangerous, ancient and eternal. Tutankhamun's tomb arrived at the height of this obsession. In a world recovering from the horrors of World War I, people craved mystery, adventure, and reminders of forces greater than themselves. The idea of a deadly curse felt thrilling. Even reassuring, it implied that the past was alive, that unseen powers still governed the fates of men. Lord Carnarvon's death became the perfect symbol for the story. He was wealthy, powerful, and secure, yet one bite from a mosquito and an infection brought him down just weeks after entering the tomb. To journalists, this was too perfect to ignore. They ignored the medical explanations and instead painted his death as proof of supernatural vengeance. His sudden passing was dramatic enough, but the press added eerie flourishes. They reported that the lights in Cairo went out at the exact moment of his death. They claimed his dog, thousands of miles away in England, howled and dropped dead at the same hour. Each detail was sensational, each headline louder than the last dot, and the public loved it. Sales of newspapers soared. Readers devoured every rumor, no matter how far-fetched. Other deaths of those connected to the excavation, whether real or loosely tied, were added to the growing list of victims. A fever here, a sudden collapse there, and the press wove them all into the tapestry of the curse. Within months, the story of Tutankhamun's tomb had transformed from a great archaeological triumph into one of the greatest ghost stories of the 20th century. Howard Carter himself despised the rumors. He was a man of science, methodical and precise, who saw the tomb as a historic treasure, not a haunted crypt. He publicly dismissed the curse as tommy rot, frustrated that superstition overshadowed his life's greatest achievement. Yet even Carter could not completely escape the cloud of mystery. Newspapers painted him as the fearless explorer, defying the wrath of the gods, a character torn between genius and arrogance. His very defiance fed the legend. If the curse were not real, why did he have to keep denying it? The media also understood the allure of fear. Fear sells. Stories of a curse reached beyond archaeology and became part of popular culture. Writers, filmmakers, and artists seized upon the tale, filling theaters with horror films about resurrected mummies and haunted tombs. The 1932 film The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff, was directly inspired by the rumors surrounding Tut. From then on, the idea of the vengeful mummy became a staple of horror, direct legacy of the press's 1920s frenzy. But perhaps the most unsettling impact of the media was how it blurred the line between fact and fiction. By repeatedly printing falsehoods, newspapers shaped how millions perceived the discovery. To this day, many still believe that Carter found an inscription warning of death despite the fact that no such words were ever uncovered. The press had effectively created a legend so enduring that it outlived the truth. In hindsight, we see how the press not only reported the curse, but also created it. Without the newspapers, Carnarvon's death might have been a tragic footnote in history. Instead, it became the spark that lit a worldwide fire of superstition. Reporters knew exactly how to package the story, blend mystery with fear, ancient power with modern tragedy. They turned archaeology into theater, with Tutankhamun as the star, and death itself as the antagonist. Even today, the fingerprints of the 1920s media frenzy remain. Every time a documentary mentions the curse of the pharaohs, every time a film features a mummy rising from the grave, we are hearing echoes of those sensational headlines. The curse was never just an Egyptian legend, it was a media invention, one that proved as deadly and immortal as the boy king himself. And yet, while it's easy to criticize the sensationalism, one must admit, the press succeeded. They gave Tutankhamun immortality not through his reign, which was short and relatively insignificant, but through the myth they built around him. Thanks to the curse, Tutankhamun became a household name. His golden mask, one of the most recognized images in the world. The boy king, who was forgotten by history and life, was remembered forever in death, because the press turned him into a legend. Chapter 13. The victims of the curse, who really paid the price. When Lord Carnarvon died in April 1923, the world was quick to believe he was the first victim of Tutankhamun's wrath. The headlines declared it, the rumors confirmed it, and soon the curse of the pharaohs had its first fatality. But Carnarvon's death was only the beginning. Over the years that followed, a series of tragedies, misfortunes, and unexplained illnesses would be woven into the growing tapestry of the curse. Whether coincidence or consequence, the list of supposed victims grew on with it. The chilling belief that the boy king's tomb carried a deadly price. Carnarvon's end was dramatic enough to set the stage for all that followed. A mosquito bite on his cheek, which became infected after he nicked it shaving, turned septic. In the days before antibiotics, such an infection could easily prove fatal, and it did. Yet the details gave it a sinister aura. His daughter later claimed he cried out just before death, seeing a vision of a golden bird. Others insisted that, at the exact hour he passed, the lights in Cairo mysteriously flickered and died. And in England, thousands of miles away, his beloved dog Susie reportedly howled and dropped dead at that very moment. Coincidence? The press thought not. But Carnarvon was far from the only victim. Within months, The curse had claimed another Prince Ali Kamel, Fahmy Bey of Egypt, who had visited the tomb not long after its discovery. He was shot dead by his wife in a Paris hotel. Newspapers were quick to fold his death into the curse's growing body count. Soon, every passing of anyone remotely connected to the excavation was treated not as tragedy, but as proof of supernatural vengeance. One of the most chilling cases was that of George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier. Gould visited the tomb in 1923, shortly after it was opened. Within days of his visit, he fell violently ill with a fever and died. To the press, this was no accident. It was the pharaoh striking down another intruder. Then came Arthur Mace, a member of Carter's excavation team. Mace was a brilliant archaeologist who had dedicated years of his life to Egyptian studies. In 1928, he died suddenly of arsenic poisoning. Though the cause was unclear, some suggested it was related to his fragile health. The public needed no convincing. To them, Tutankhamun's curse had claimed yet another. The list continued to grow. In 1929, Lord Carnarvon's half-brother, Colonel Aubrey Herbert, died of blood poisoning following dental surgery. The connection was tenuous at best, but that didn't stop newspapers from labeling him a victim of the curse. The same year, another member of the excavation team, Richard Bethel, Carter's personal secretary, was found dead in his bed at a London club. The cause was said to be suffocation. Bethel's father, Lord Westbury, later leapt to his death from a building, leaving behind a note lamenting the curse of Tutankhamun. By now, the curse was no longer just a story, it was a phenomenon. Every tragedy, no matter how unrelated, became evidence of an otherworldly power striking down those who dared to disturb the pharaoh's rest. Between 1923 and 1935, more than a dozen deaths were attributed to the curse. Perhaps the most eerie victim was Howard Carter's close colleague, Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who examined the mummy with X-rays. Reed died shortly afterward, fueling speculation that the pharaoh resented even scientific intrusion into his body. Then there was Evelyn White, another Egyptologist who visited the tomb. He later took his own life, reportedly leaving behind a note scrawled in his own blood. "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." The web of death seemed endless. Men fell ill, accidents occurred, families suffered loss, all conveniently tied to Tutankhamun. It didn't matter that many who had entered the tomb lived long, healthy lives, including Howard Carter himself, who survived nearly 2 decades after the discovery, dying peacefully in 1939. What mattered was the story. The curse had momentum, and every death added fuel to its fire. Yet, as much as the curse terrified the public, it also fascinated them. The victims were not faceless, they were aristocrats, scientists, financiers, men of wealth and learning. Their deaths gave the story glamour and weight. Each one reinforced the idea that no matter how powerful or intelligent, no man could defy the gods of ancient Egypt. But were these deaths really supernatural? Many scholars argue otherwise. Some suggest that the tomb carried ancient bacteria or toxic molds sealed away for millennia, unleashed when the chamber was opened. Lord Carnarvon's infection, George Gould's fever, Arthur Mace's mysterious illness all might be explained by biological hazards. Others believe the curse was little more than coincidence amplified by the media's hunger for spectacle. After all, dozens of people entered the tomb and survived with no ill effects. Still, the curse's victims remained central to the legend. Their deaths gave flesh to superstition and allowed the myth to live. Without them, the story of tomb would have been one of archaeology and discovery. With them, it became one of fear and fascination. Even today, visitors to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where Tutankhamun's treasures are displayed, feel a chill when they see his mask, knowing the stories of those who died after gazing upon it. Tourists whisper about Carnarvon, Gould, Mace, Bethel. Their names are etched not just into history, but into legend. They are remembered not for who they were in life, but for how they did and for the role their deaths played in keeping the curse alive. In truth, the victims of the curse were as much creations of the story as they were casualties of fate. The curse needed them, just as much as the newspapers needed the curse. Whether or not they died because of Tutankhamun, their tragedies became fuel for the myth that made the boy king immortal. Chapter 14. Science versus Superstition. Debunking the curse. The tale of the pharaoh's curse has endured for over a century. gripping imaginations and haunting the popular mind. But beneath the sensational headlines and whispered rumors, there lies another story, a battle between belief and reason, between the allure of superstition and the rigors of science. To truly understand the curse of Tutankhamun, one must look beyond the chilling coincidences and investigate the evidence that challenges the myth. From the moment Lord Carnarvon's death was announced, scientists and skeptics began searching for rational explanations. After all, archaeology is rooted in logic, not magic. What if the deaths linked to the curse were not divine punishments, but the inevitable outcomes of biology, environment, and chance? One of the earliest theories suggested that Tutankhamun's tomb harbored ancient pathogens. Sealed for more than 3,000 years, the chambers may have contained toxic molds, spores, or bacteria. When Carter's team broke through, these microscopic killers could have been released into the stale air, infecting anyone who inhaled them. This theory gained traction after studies in the 20th century discovered dangerous molds like flevis in Egyptian tombs, capable of producing deadly Could Lord Carnarvon's fatal blood infection have been triggered by just such an organism? There's also the possibility of ammonia, formaldehyde, or hydrogen sulfide chemicals, sometimes present in ancient burial chambers. These substances, sealed in by centuries, could poison intruders upon sudden exposure. The idea of a biological trap, whether intentional or accidental, fits neatly into the curse narrative. Yet, no definitive scientific proof has ever been uncovered from Tutankhamun's tomb itself. Others point to sheer coincidence. Consider the facts. More than 50 people were present during the opening of the tomb in 1923. If the curse were real, why did the vast majority live long, healthy lives? Howard Carter himself lived until 1939, dying of lymphoma at age 60 for hardly the sudden, dramatic fate one would expect from a man cursed by the gods. His chief colleague, Alfred Lucas, a chemist, also lived for years after the discovery. Even Lady Evelyn Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's daughter, who was one of the first to enter the tomb, lived to the age of 70. These long lifespans weaken the idea of a universal curse. Statistical analysis further undermines the myth. In 2002, researchers examined the lifespans of those involved in Tutankhamun's excavation compared to a control group. The results: no significant difference. The deaths were scattered across years, explained by ordinary causes of the eerie disease, infection, and age. What had been portrayed as supernatural vengeance was, by numbers, nothing unusual. Yet science had an uphill battle against the tide of sensationalism. Newspapers thrived on the curse. The Times, which held exclusive rights to report on the discovery, often avoided printing the rumors, but rival publications capitalized on them. Tales of dead dogs, broken light bulbs, and mysterious illnesses filled headlines for the press. The curse was a goldmine. For the public, it was irresistible. And so, even when scientists offered logical explanations, the allure of the supernatural always seemed stronger. There is also the psychological factor: fear itself. The human mind is powerful, and belief can shape reality. If one truly believes they are cursed, stress and anxiety can manifest as physical illness. Ancient Egyptians themselves understood this. Curses were designed not merely to punish, but to terrify. A single inscription threatening death could instill enough dread to weaken the body and soul of anyone who dared to defy it. Could some of the deaths attributed to the curse be explained by the nocebo effect, the dark twin of the placebo effect, where belief in harm becomes harm itself? Still, science has not dismissed the possibility of deliberate traps. Egyptian priests and embalmers were masters of preservation, ritual, and secrecy. Some historians argue that lethal measures may have been taken to protect the tombs of pharaohs, not supernatural, but chemical or biological deterrents. Though no hard evidence was found in Tutankhamun's resting place, the notion adds fuel to the scientific side of the curse. Perhaps not divine wrath, but ancient ingenuity at work. But perhaps the greatest blow to the curse came from Carter himself. The meticulous archaeologist kept records, documented every find, and never once reported anything he believed to be supernatural. He dismissed the curse as nonsense, frustrated by how much it overshadowed the significance of the discovery. For Carter, Tutankhamun's tomb was the archaeological find of the century, a treasure trove of history, not horror. And yet, even Carter could not silence the whispers. The public wanted the curse, they needed it. In an age of growing science and industry, People still craved mystery, magic, and the unknown. The curse of the Pharaoh offered all of that, wrapped in gold and sealed beneath desert sands. Modern science continues to probe the mystery. Forensic examinations of Tutankhamun's mummy had revealed his own struggles with illness, including malaria and a deformed foot. Some scientists suggest that if the young king himself suffered so much in life, perhaps the myth of his deadly curse was born from projection, from the idea that a ruler who endured such pain would not rest quietly in death. In the end, science cannot entirely erase the curse, because the curse is not built on evidence, it's built on story. It thrives in the gaps between facts, in the spaces where logic falters and imagination takes over. Rational explanations may dismantle the myth piece by piece, but they cannot kill it, because the curse of Tutankhamun, whether real or imagined, speaks to something deeper than mold, spores, or coincidence. It speaks to our fascination with the eternal battle between the living and the dead. For every scientist who dismisses the curse, there are countless storytellers, filmmakers, and dreamers who breathe life back into it. And so, science may debunk, but superstition endures. The curse of Tutankhamun remains, not in the air of his tomb, but in the minds of those who dare to believe. Chapter 15. The Media Frenzy. How Newspapers Fueled the Curse. The year was 1922. Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was one of the most astonishing archaeological triumphs of the century. Behind the sealed stone doors lay untouched treasures, artifacts of unimaginable wealth, and the promise of unlocking a forgotten world. It was history in the making, an academic breakthrough destined to transform our understanding of ancient Egypt. But outside the Valley of the Kings, something else was brewing, something that would take the careful notes of archaeology and twist them into a legend of blood, death, and curses. It began with a single death. Lord Carnarvon, Carter's patron, died suddenly in April 1923, just months after entering the tomb. Almost overnight, headlines around the world screamed of a curse. Death comes to Tombbreaker. Mysterious Pharaoh's revenge. Doom of the mummy claims first victim. Newspapers painted Carnarvon's death not as a medical misfortune, but as divine retribution for disturbing the eternal sleep of Egypt's boy king. The reality was less sensational. Carnarvon had suffered a mosquito bite on his cheek that became infected, blood poisoning set in, and in an age before antibiotics, the infection spread quickly. But the press had no interest in medical reports. A gruesome death connected to an ancient king. That was the kind of story that sold papers. Soon, other strange occurrences were tied to the curse. One story claimed that at the moment of Carnarvon's death in Cairo, all the lights in the city mysteriously went out. Another alleged that his dog, far away in England, let out a terrible howl and collapsed dead at the same instant. These tales had no verifiable evidence, but newspapers printed them anyway, and once printed, they became fact in the public imagination. The British press, competing fiercely for readers, leaned heavily into the supernatural. The Daily Mail, in particular, fanned the flames. It was this paper that had introduced the idea of a curse even before Carnarvon's death, publishing a fabricated inscription, supposedly found on the tomb's door. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king. No such inscription was ever discovered, but the words lingered in headlines, haunting the public's mind. In America, the frenzy only grew. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb had captured imaginations across the Atlantic, and American papers ran with every rumor they could find. One article claimed a cobra, symbol of the pharaoh's wrath, had slithered into Carter's house and killed his beloved canary. Another insisted that Egyptian priests had foretold death for any who trespassed upon Tutankhamun's resting place. These tales were repeated so often that even skeptical readers began to wonder, could the curse be real? Hollywood soon joined the storm. By the 1930s, films like The Mummy brought the legend of the curse to cinema audiences, cementing the connection between ancient Egypt and supernatural terror. What had begun as a string of dubious newspaper stories had now become global myth. But the press did more than tell ghost stories. They manipulated events. Journalists would swarm Carter's excavation site, eager for drama. Every illness, every accident, every misstep was exaggerated into evidence of the curse. When Arthur Mace, one of Carter's colleagues, fell ill and later died, the headlines declared him another victim of Tut. When a wealthy visitor to the tomb suffered a stroke, the papers cried that the curse had struck again. The frenzy created a feedback loop. The more the public believed in the curse, the more they demanded stories about it. And the more stories the papers published, the more the myth grew. Truth was irrelevant. What mattered was spectacle. Even respected outlets could not resist. The Times of London, which held exclusive rights to official reporting from Carter's excavation, avoided the more absurd claims, but still capitalized on the drama. They knew the public was less interested in catalogues of artifacts and more enthralled by whispers of doom. A golden mask was fascinating, but a deadly curse was unforgettable. Howard Carter himself grew increasingly frustrated. He wanted the world to see the tomb as a triumph of archaeology, not a carnival of superstition. But Carter's calm explanations, his insistence that no curse inscription had been found, that most of his team lived long lives, were drowned out by the roar of the press. Facts could not compete with the thrill of fear. The curse became so widespread that even those far removed from the excavation claimed to feel its shadow. Businessmen who had funded expeditions spoke of misfortunes. Tourists fainted when visiting Egyptian exhibits. A few deaths were blamed on cursed artifacts shipped abroad, leading to whispers that even museums might harbor the pharaoh's wrath. The press had created not just a story, but a cultural phenomenon. The legend of the curse became part of the West's fascination with the exotic and the forbidden mirror of its anxieties about colonialism, mortality, and the unknown. For newspapers, it was the perfect storm, a real discovery wrapped in mystery, tied to ancient history, and laced with death. Yet, there was a darker consequence. The obsession with the curse often overshadowed the true significance of Tutankhamun's tomb. While journalists spun tales of doom, archaeologists were carefully uncovering relics that revealed incredible insights into Egyptian life, art, and politics. Entire academic breakthroughs were relegated to the back pages, while curses claimed the headlines. History had been buried beneath sensationalism, and this frenzy never truly ended. Decades later, when Tutankhamun's treasures toured the world, in museum exhibitions, whispers of the curse resurfaced. Visitors joked nervously, reporters recycled old stories, and documentaries replayed the same myths. The press had planted the seed, and it continued to grow long after Carter and his colleagues had passed away. The Pharaoh's curse is perhaps the greatest media creation in history, not born from hieroglyphs or ancient magic, but from the typewriters of hungry journalists. In many ways, the real curse was not Tutankhamun's wrath, but the press's ability to transform tragedy into spectacle, science into superstition, and archaeology into horror. And once the newspapers had cast their spell, there was no undoing it. The world would never again see Tutankhamun simply as a young king of Egypt. Thanks to the media frenzy, he became something more, a symbol of mystery, danger, and eternal vengeance. Chapter 16. The Aftermath. Tutankhamun's legacy in popular culture. When Howard Carter first peered through the small opening into Tutankhamun's tomb and caught the glint of wonderful things, he could not have imagined the chain reaction he had unleashed. The treasures he uncovered would become symbols of one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. Yet, in the century since that moment, the name Tutankhamun has taken on a life far beyond the desert sands of Egypt. The young pharaoh, barely remembered by his own people, has become one of the most famous figures of all time, thanks not only to his tomb's dazzling artifacts, but also to the myths, fears, and fascinations that sprang up around him. The aftermath of Tutankhamun's discovery was a cultural explosion. At the heart of it was the so-called curse of the pharaohs, a narrative that newspapers had eagerly nurtured. But the legend did not remain confined to print. It seeped into literature, film, music, fashion, and even political rhetoric. Tutankhamun became more than an archaeological subject. He became a brand, an icon of mystery, a symbol of forbidden knowledge and ancient power. In the 1920s and 1930s, Egyptomania swept across Europe and America. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb coincided with a wave of fascination for the exotic and the occult. Writers wove tales of cursed relics and mummies' revenge, often directly inspired by the rumors surrounding Carter's excavation. Horror magazines thrived on it. Pulp novels churned out countless mummy stories, where explorers who defied the pharaohs were doomed to grisly ends. Hollywood was quick to recognize the potential. In 1932, The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff, brought the curse to the silver screen, cementing the connection between Tutankhamun and supernatural horror in the popular imagination. The film was not historically accurate. It was a romanticized fantasy filled with magic, reincarnation, and forbidden love. But accuracy was never the point. It was spectacle, and audiences devoured it. The mummy's curse became an enduring, cinematic trope, one that still appears in films today. But Tutankhamun's influence stretched far beyond horror. The aesthetic of his tombs, treasures, golden masks, intricate jewelry, lotus motifs, winged scarabs became inspiration for fashion and design. Art Deco, already in full bloom during the 1920s, absorbed Egyptian themes. Jewelry designers incorporated motifs from Tutankhamun's treasures, while architects embedded stylized sphinxes and obelisks into buildings. Egyptian-inspired dresses graced runways in Paris and New York, proof that the young pharaoh had become an unlikely trendsetter. Thousands of years after his death, the music industry also joined the wave. In 1923, just months after Carnarvon's death, a popular novelty song titled Old King Tut was released, poking fun at the obsession with Egypt. Later, jazz clubs embraced Egyptian motifs, and bands incorporated exotic rhythms to capitalize on the craze. The fascination with Tutankhamun was everywhere, from the dance floor to the theater stage. Even literature could not resist. Writers such as Agatha Christie drew inspiration from the feverish atmosphere. Her 1937 novel Death on the Nile captured the allure of Egypt's ancient mystery against the backdrop of modern tourism. While she never explicitly invoked the curse of Tutankhamun, the cultural shadow of the boy king loomed large over her work, but the impact went beyond entertainment. Tutankhamun's tomb ignited a political and cultural awakening in Egypt itself. For decades, Egypt had been under British colonial control, and many Egyptians viewed the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb as symbolic of their own struggle for national pride. As treasures were catalogued and often claimed by Western powers, Egyptians demanded their heritage be preserved for themselves. Tutankhamun became a rallying point, a reminder of Egypt's glorious past and its right to control its own future. In later decades, Tutankhamun's treasures became ambassadors of Egypt's identity on the world stage. The 1972 to 1981 Treasures of Tutankhamun exhibition tour was one of the most successful museum events in history. Millions of people lined up in New York, London, Paris, and Tokyo to catch a glimpse of the boy king's golden mask. For many, it was the first time they had seen such artifacts up close, and the exhibition sparked a global frenzy. The curse was still whispered about in the lines outside museums, but it was the sheer majesty of the treasures that truly captivated audiences. The curse also refused to die. Decades after Carter's excavation, popular media continued to recycle the myth. Documentaries retold the story with ominous narrations and eerie music. Tabloids revived old tales whenever an archaeologist or researcher connected to Tutankhamun passed away. Even scientists who dismissed the curse found themselves repeatedly asked about it in interviews. The myth had outgrown the facts. It had become immortal. In the modern age, Tutankhamun has even made his way into video games, comic books, and television series. From cartoons like DuckTales to blockbuster games like Assassin's Creed Origins, the Boy King appears again and again, reshaped for new audiences. He has become both a historical figure and a character of legend, straddling the line between fact and fantasy. Psychologists have argued that the persistence of the curse speaks to something deeper in human nature. The idea of forbidden knowledge, the notion that disturbing the dead will bring punishment, resonates across cultures. Tutankhamun's story gave modern society a way to play with that fear safely. Through newspapers, movies, and exhibitions, it was a collective thrill, a brush with mortality packaged as entertainment. And yet, for all the myths, Tutankhamun himself remains a tragic figure. Behind the golden mask and the global fame was a young boy who ruled for less than a decade and died before reaching adulthood. His reign was overshadowed by the turmoil of his predecessors, and had Carter not stumbled upon his tomb, Tutankhamun might have been forgotten altogether. Ironically, it is his death and the myths surrounding it that granted him immortality. The aftermath of his discovery reveals as much about us as it does about him. It shows how society craves mystery, how we turn history into legend, and how a story, once told, can grow larger than life. Tutankhamun became a mirror for the fears and fantasies of the modern world. The fear of death, the lure of treasure, the suspicion of ancient powers, and the thrill of danger. A century later, Tutankhamun's name still evokes awe, his face captured forever in that iconic golden mask remains one of the most recognized images on Earth. And though archaeologists, historians, and scientists continue to peel away the myths, the legend of the curse ensures that Tutankhamun is remembered not just as a pharaoh, but as the eternal boy king of mystery. The discovery of his tomb gave the world more than artifacts. It gave us a story that refuses to die, a story we keep telling, reshaping, and passing on. In the end, that may be Tutankhamun's greatest legacy, not the curse, not the treasures, but the enduring power of myth. Chapter 17. Science versus superstition breaking down. The curse, so-called curse of Tutankhamun, is one of the most famous legends in historia. Stories so deeply entrenched in popular imagination that it is almost impossible to separate fact from fiction. From the moment Lord Carnarvon died in April 1923, whispers of supernatural vengeance rippled across the globe. Headlines screamed of the pharaoh's wrath, and the notion of an ancient curse struck terror into readers already fascinated by the exotic and mysterious. But a century later, how much truth lies in the myth? Was it really a curse or something far more human, rooted in science, circumstance, and psychology? To unravel this, we must first understand the context. Ancient Egyptians certainly believed in the sanctity of the tomb. Their burial chambers were sealed with protective spells inscribed on walls, sarcophagi, and amulets. These were not merely symbolic. To them, they were magical safeguards ensuring the pharaoh's eternal peace and punishing those who dared to disturb it. Modern audiences, reading about these spells, naturally connected them to the deaths surrounding Carter's team. Yet there is a stark truth. No actual curse was ever written inside Tutankhamun's tomb. Unlike some earlier burials that carried protective warnings, the boy king's resting place bore no inscription promising revenge. So why did the curse take hold so powerfully? Much of the blame and credit lies with the press. Newspapers in the 1920s thrived on sensationalism. When Lord Carnarvon died unexpectedly from blood poisoning after a mosquito bite turned septic, journalists seized upon it as evidence of divine retribution. The story was irresistible. A wealthy aristocrat defies the sanctity of a pharaoh's tomb, only to perish mysteriously weeks later. From London to New York, headlines spoke of the pharaoh's revenge. Readers devoured it, and circulation numbers soared. The curse became the ultimate marketing tool, and soon every death remotely linked to the excavation was added to the tally. But historians and scientists began to ask questions. Was there something more rational behind these tragedies? One theory points to the tomb itself. Sealed underground for over 3,000 years, it may have harbored deadly microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, or mold that thrived in the dark, humid environment. When Carter's team opened the chambers, they could have inhaled spores or pathogens that modern medicine was not equipped to handle. In fact, studies of ancient tombs have revealed strains of toxic molds, such as Aspergillus flavus, capable of producing mycotoxins that damaged the lungs and immune system. Some suggested that Carnarvon, already weakened by poor health, succumbed to such exposure. However, this theory has limits. Carter himself, the man who spent the most time inside the tomb, lived another 16 years, dying peacefully in 1939 at the age of 64. Many others on the excavation team also lived long, healthy lives. If the tomb was truly teeming with deadly toxins, why did they not claim more victims? The uneven pattern of deaths complicates the microbial theory, suggesting that coincidence and pre-existing conditions played larger roles than curses or contagion. Another scientific angle lies in psychosomatic illness, the power of belief to influence health. The early 20th century was steeped in superstition, and the idea of curses was widely accepted, even among educated elites. If someone believed they were doomed because they had entered a cursed tomb, stress and fear could weaken their immune system, making them more vulnerable to illness or even hastening death. Psychologists argued that this nocebo effect might explain why some people close to the excavation fell ill under mysterious circumstances. Fear itself became a weapon, but perhaps the greatest explanation is the simplest: coincidence magnified by storytelling. Lord Carnarvon's death was tragic, but it was not inexplicable. He was known to be in fragile health, plagued by respiratory issues since a car accident years earlier. The other supposed victims of the curse also had clear medical or situational causes for their deaths. For example, Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who died after extraying Tutankhamun's mummy, had health complications unrelated to the tomb. Prince Ali Komal Fahmy Bey, sometimes listed among the cursed horse, was murdered by his wife in Paris, an event entirely unconnected to ancient Egypt. Yet each of these deaths, when bundled together in the public imagination, fed the myth of a supernatural force. Still, the persistence of the curse raises a deeper question: why do we want to believe it? The answer lies in the psychology of mystery. Humanity has always been drawn to stories of forbidden knowledge, punishment, and the unseen hand of fate. The curse provided a narrative that was far more compelling than the mundane reality of infections, accidents, and coincidence. It allowed people to feel that the ancient world still had power over the modern, that the pharaohs could reach across millennia to defend their eternal rest. It was terrifying, yes, but also thrilling. Modern science has continued to test the tomb curse theory. In the early 2000s, researchers examined the lifespans of those associated with the Tutankhamun excavation and compared them to average life expectancy at the time. The results were surprising. The members of Carter's team actually lived longer, on average, than their contemporaries. Far from being cursed, they may have been among the luckier group. The statistics punctured the myth, but they did little to diminish its cultural grip. Even today, the curse remains a staple of documentaries, books, and movies. It survives not because it is true, but because it fulfills something deep within the human psyche. We want to believe that some things are beyond our control, that there are boundaries which, if crossed, will summon forces greater than ourselves. The curse of Tutankhamun, whether supernatural or symbolic, embodies that timeless fear. In the end, science has given us explanations: bacteria, coincidence, stress, storytelling. But perhaps the real power of the curse lies not in death tolls or microbes, but in its ability to endure. Facts can debunk it, but fascination keeps it alive. The legend continues because we want it to. After all, what is more haunting, the idea that an ancient boy king lies powerless beneath the sands, or that he still whispers from the grave, guarding his secrets with a curse that refuses to fade? Chapter 18. Tutankhamun in the modern imagination. From museums to movies. When Howard Carter first peered into Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 and declared he saw wonderful things, he could not have imagined just how prophetic those words would be. What he uncovered was not just the burial chamber of a forgotten pharaoh, but the seed of a cultural phenomenon that would ripple across the globe for over a century. From museum exhibitions that drew millions, to Hollywood blockbusters that turned the mummy into a horror icon, Tutankhamun has never truly returned to the silence of his grave. Instead, his image, his treasures, and even the legend of his curse have become fixtures of modern imagination. The first wave of fascination came in the 1920s, when the treasures of the tomb were meticulously catalogued and transported to Cairo's Egyptian Museum. The sheer wealth of objects, golden shrines, jewel-encrusted amulets, intricately carved statues sparked a frenzy. Newspapers ran photographs of the artifacts, fueling what became known as Tutmania. Across Europe and America, Tut likeness appeared everywhere, on jewelry, furniture, clothing, even cosmetics. The 1920s were already an age obsessed with exoticism, and the boy king's treasures fit perfectly into the Jazz Age aesthetic. Cleopatra eyeliner and Egyptian-inspired dresses strutted down fashion runways, while Art Deco design borrowed heavily from the geometric motifs of the tomb. But it wasn't just fashion and style that were influenced. Tutankhamun also entered the realm of mass entertainment. Hollywood, still in its infancy, found fertile ground in the mystique of ancient Egypt. The curse stories, sensationalized by the press, gave filmmakers all the material they needed. In 1932, Universal Pictures released The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff. Though the film wasn't directly about Tutankhamun, it drew heavily from the events of 1922. The plot revolved around an ancient Egyptian priest brought back to life, cursed love, and the dangers of disturbing the dead. It was a thinly veiled retelling of the Carter expedition, but with a horror twist that captured audiences' imaginations. From that point on, mummies became a staple of popular culture. They lurked in comic books, terrorized adventurers in pulp magazines, and shambled across television screens. Tutankhamun himself was rarely the direct villain, but his tomb's discovery was the undeniable catalyst for the entire genre. In many ways, Carter had not only uncovered a pharaoh, he had unleashed a monster that would haunt Western pop culture for decades. The fascination grew again in the 1960s and 1970s, when Egyptian authorities began allowing Tutankhamun's treasures to travel abroad. Exhibitions in London, Paris, and Tokyo drew unprecedented crowds, but nothing compared to the 1976 to 1979 exhibition in the United States, titled Treasures of Tutankhamun. It toured 6 American cities, including Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, and drew more than 8 million visitors. For many, it was their first encounter with ancient Egypt in a tangible form, and it left an indelible mark. Newspapers called it the most successful exhibition in history. People stood in line for hours, sometimes days, just to catch a glimpse of the golden masked face of the boy king, radiant in eternal youth. But alongside admiration came commercialization. Tutankhamun's face appeared on everything from coffee mugs to lunchboxes, turning a sacred artifact into a global brand. Some critics accused the West of cheapening ancient culture, while others saw it as a form of immortality. Tutankhamun was no longer just a pharaoh. He was a superstar. In some ways, he became Egypt's most enduring ambassador, drawing tourists and inspiring generations to study archaeology. BHO movies continued to build on this fascination. Films like The 10 Commandments, 1956, Cleopatra, 1963, and later The Mummy, 1999 franchise drew heavily from the imagery and legends surrounding Egypt, blending fact and fiction into dazzling spectacles. Tutankhamun himself occasionally appeared as a character, but more often he was a shadowy presence. The name evoked mystery, curses, and glittering gold. Even children's cartoons like Scooby-Doo featured Pharaoh's curses, proof that the boy king's legend had reached every corner of storytelling. In the digital age, Tutankhamun's reach has only expanded. Documentaries on National Geographic, the BBC, and Netflix have revisited his story with fresh scientific insight. CT scans of his mummy revealed startling details: a foot, malaria infections, and evidence of congenital defects possibly caused by inbreeding. These discoveries painted a more tragic picture of the boy king, not the golden god his mask suggested, but a frail teenager, burdened by physical limitations. Yet even this vulnerability only deepened the fascination. People wanted not only the legend of the curse and the glitter of gold, but the humanity behind the mask. Tutankhamun's story also lives in music, art, and even internet culture. Songs, memes, and satirical sketches have ensured his name remains recognizable even to those who know little about history. Every generation rediscovers him in their own way, sometimes as a symbol of majesty, sometimes as a pop culture icon, and sometimes as the star of conspiracy theories about aliens, Atlantis, or lost civilizations. What makes Tutankhamun so magnetic is not simply his tomb, but the contradictions within his legacy. He was a minor king, ruling only a few years, and yet he is more famous than Ramses the Great or Cleopatra. His reign was unremarkable, but his burial made him immortal. His treasures symbolize unimaginable wealth, yet his body tells a tale of fragility. He is both a cautionary tale of hubris, disturb the dead, suffer the curse, and a beacon of curiosity that drives us to keep asking questions about our past. In the end, Tutankhamun's place in modern imagination is less about who he was, and more about what he represents. To some, he is a reminder of the grandeur of ancient Egypt. To others, he is proof that history is never truly buried. Secrets can survive thousands of years, waiting to be uncovered. And to millions of museum visitors, filmgoers, and history enthusiasts, he is a bridge between worlds, a boy from the Bronze Age whose shadow still walks among us in gold and myth. Perhaps this is the real curse of Tutankhamun, not death or disease, but eternal fascination. No matter how much science explains or how often we debunk the myths, we cannot let go of him. His mask, his treasures, his story, they haunt us, not with fear, but with wonder. And in that sense, Tutankhamun has achieved what every pharaoh desired: immortality, carved not into stone, but into the collective memory of the modern world. Chapter 19. The political legacy of Tutankhamun: nationalism, colonialism, and the battle for antiquities. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 was not just an archaeological milestone, it was also a political earthquake. Behind the glitter of gold and the thrill of mystery lay a deeper, more contentious story, a struggle over ownership, identity, and power. The boy king's resting place, sealed for more than 3 millennia, suddenly became the centerpiece of a heated debate that continues to echo in our modern world. Whose heritage was Tutankhamun? Who had the right to display his treasures? And what role did his tomb play in shaping the politics of Egypt, colonial powers, and global museums? To understand this legacy, we must begin with the historical backdrop. In the early 20th century, Egypt was under British control, officially declared a protectorate in 1914. Its people longed for independence, but its antiquities, its pyramids, temples, and tombs were largely in the hands of foreign archaeologists and collectors. For decades, Europeans had scoured Egypt's deserts, filling the halls of the British Museum, the Louvre, and Berlin's News Museum with sarcophagi and statues. The treasures of the Nile were treated not as Egyptian heritage, but as spoils of discovery, claimed by those who found them. When Howard Carter, a British archaeologist, uncovered Tutankhamun's tomb under the patronage of Lord Carnarvon, the expectation was the same, that the treasures would be divided, with some sent abroad. This was the practice known as partage, where foreign archaeologists kept portions of their finds in exchange for funding the digs. But Tutankhamun's tomb was different, so intact, so magnificent, that the Egyptians refused to let a single artifact leave the country. This refusal ignited a firestorm. British officials and newspapers cried out, insisting that Carter and Carnarvon had a claim. Egyptian nationalists, on the other hand, saw the treasures as a symbol of their stolen dignity. For decades they had watched foreigners profit from their past, while ordinary Egyptians were left in poverty. Tutankhamun, suddenly resurrected from obscurity, became a rallying point for pride and resistance. The boy king was no longer just an ancient pharaoh, he was a political banner waving in the winds of independence. The Egyptian government, newly energized by the nationalist movement, placed guards around the tomb and enforced strict control over the artifacts. Tensions escalated between Carter and Egyptian authorities, culminating in a bitter standoff. Carter accused officials of corruption and incompetence. Egyptians accused Carter of arrogance and theft. At one point, the tomb was even sealed off by the government, and Carter's access was revoked. The dispute grew so fierce that negotiations had to be brokered at the highest levels. For Egypt, this was about more than a tomb. It was about reclaiming control over their identity. Tutankhamun's treasures were proof of Egypt's glorious past, a reminder that their culture had once commanded respect and power. Now, in the shadow of British imperialism, the boy king became a weapon in the fight for cultural sovereignty. The conflict over Tutankhamun's tomb resonated far beyond Egypt. Across the colonized world, people watched closely. Here was a nation standing up to empire, demanding ownership of its own past. Tutankhamun became a symbol not just of Egypt, but of a broader struggle against cultural exploitation. The golden mask, glittering in photographs, was not only a masterpiece of craftsmanship, it was an emblem of defiance. The struggle over antiquities continued long after the initial discovery. In the decades that followed, Egypt demanded the return of artifacts taken during the colonial era. Some were repatriated, but many remained abroad, locked in the vaults of Western museums. The Rosetta Stone, still in the British Museum, became a flashpoint in these debates. Egyptians asked, if Tutankhamun could remain in Cairo, why not all of Egypt's treasures? Tutankhamun's legacy also reshaped how archaeology was conducted. His discovery marked the end of an era when foreigners could casually ship antiquities. Overseas, Egypt began tightening its laws, asserting greater authority over expiations. Archaeologists were still welcome, but the days of treasure hunting were gone. From then on, Egypt demanded respect, control, and recognition as the rightful guardian of its heritage. In the modern age, the politics of Tutankhamun continue to evolve. His treasures have traveled the world in exhibitions, drawing millions, but always under Egyptian supervision. When the Golden Mask left Cairo for tours in London, Paris, or Los Angeles, it was not merely an artifact, it was a diplomat, carrying with it the message of Egyptian pride. Each exhibition was also a financial boon, raising revenue and fueling tourism. In this way, Tutankhamun became an economic asset as much as a cultural one, helping Egypt reclaim power on its own terms. But alongside pride came controversy. Critics accused Egypt of exploiting Tutankhamun commercially, turning his image into a brand. Souvenirs, trinkets, and mass-produced replicas flooded gift shops. Was this truly honoring the boy king, or commodifying him all over again, this time for domestic profit rather than foreign gain? The debate highlighted a paradox. Tutankhamun was both sacred heritage and global spectacle. At the same time, calls for repatriation grew louder. Egypt demanded the return of artifacts linked to Tutankhamun that were taken illegally or dubiously during the early days of excavation. Negotiations with international museums often turned heated. For Egypt, these battles were not just about objects, but about dignity. The question remained: who owns the past? The discoverer, the colonizer, or the descendants of the people who built it? Tutankhamun's political legacy also extends into modern Egyptian nationalism. His image adorns textbooks, stamps, and tourism campaigns. He is not just a pharaoh, but a symbol of resilience. Every year, millions of visitors flock to Luxor and Cairo, walking in the footsteps of Carter and Tutankhamun, their money fueling Egypt's economy. In a way, the boy king has become a bridge between past and present, a reminder that history is not dead, is alive, shaping nations and identities. Perhaps the greatest irony of Tutankhamun's political legacy is that the boy himself had little impact during his lifetime. He reigned for only a decade, restored some temples, and died at around 19. He was a minor king in a turbulent dynasty. Yet in death, he became more powerful than any ruler of his age. His tomb was not just a burial site. It was a battlefield of politics, nationalism, and identity. And that battle continues. Today, as Egypt unveils its grand Egyptian museum near the Giza pyramids, Tutankhamun takes center stage. His treasures will be displayed together for the first time, in a hall designed to awe visitors with their beauty and history. But behind the glittering cases lies a deeper message, that Egypt, after centuries of colonization and exploitation, is reclaiming its past. Tutankhamun is no longer a prize for foreign adventurers. He is a son of Egypt, and his story belongs, first and foremost, to his people. This is the true revenge of the pharaohs, not the curse of death whispered in newspapers, but the curse of memory, that even the mightiest empires cannot erase a nation's heritage forever. Tutankhamun's tomb, once hidden beneath desert sands, has become a stage where questions of power, justice, and identity play out. And in that sense, the boy king's legacy is not just archaeological or cultural, it is profoundly political. Chapter 20: Legacy and Immortality. How Tutankhamun continues to haunt the present. The story of Tutankhamun is one of paradoxes in life. He was a boy thrust onto the throne of Egypt, ruling for barely a decade before his mysterious death at the age of 19. In death, he became immortal not through conquest or monuments, but through chance, preservation, and rediscovery. His tomb, hidden in the Valley of the Kings for more than 3,000 years, transformed him from a forgotten pharaoh into the most famous ancient figure in the modern world. And even now, a century after his discovery, Tutankhamun refuses to rest. Quietly, he continues to haunt our imaginations, our museums, our politics, and even our pop culture. What makes Tutankhamun so magnetic? Why has this relatively minor pharaoh eclipsed Ramses the Great Seti I, or even Cleopatra in global fame? The answer lies not only in the treasures found within his tomb, but in the timing of his rediscovery. When Howard Carter uncovered the Golden Mask in 1922, the world was desperate for wonder. The Great War had just ended, leaving behind trauma and despair. Europe was scarred, its people yearning for beauty, for mystery, for something that transcended the brutality of the modern age. Tutankhamun's tomb delivered exactly that: a golden world frozen in time, a glimpse into a civilization more sophisticated and dazzling than anything the war-torn 20th century could offer. The photographs of his mask, with its serene gaze and perfect craftsmanship, ignited a global obsession. Newspapers published sensational stories. Poets and novelists wove tales around the boy king. Fashion designers adopted Egyptian motifs, sparking the so-called Tutmania of the 1920s. Jewelry, clothing, even architecture absorbed the influence of his rediscovered kingdom. Tutankhamun wasn't just an archaeological discovery, he was a cultural revolution. But as the years passed, Tutankhamun's legacy took on new shapes. For Egypt, he became a symbol of pride, proof of their unparalleled heritage. For Western powers, he was both a fascination and a point of contention, tied to debates over colonialism and cultural ownership. For scientists, he became a puzzle. His life, his death, his lineage, all subjects of endless study, each discovery raising new questions. CT scans, DNA tests, and forensic reconstructions have sought to give him flesh and voice again. Yet the Boy King remains elusive, hovering between history and myth. The so-called curse of the Pharaoh only added to his immortality. Whether true or not, the tales of sudden deaths and misfortune surrounding the tomb's excavation burned his story into the public imagination. The idea that Tutankhamun could reach across millennia to punish intruders gave his legacy a supernatural edge. Even skeptics could not resist the drama. In a way, the curse became part of his brand, amplifying his allure in a world hungry for mystery. In the decades that followed, Tutankhamun became a global ambassador for Egypt. His treasures toured the world, drawing millions of visitors. In London, in 1972, more than 1 million people lined up to see his golden mask, waiting for hours just to glimpse its beauty. In America, the exhibition was hailed as the show of the century, with crowds so massive that museums had to extend hours. These tours did more than display artifacts. They reshaped how people viewed ancient Egypt. The Nile was no longer just pyramids in the desert. It was a civilization alive with artistry, power, and divine mystery. Tutankhamun was its face, its messenger. But this immortality came with costs. Tutankhamun became a commodity, reproduced endlessly in keychains, posters, and pop culture references. Some critics argued that the commercialization cheapened his memory, turning sacred objects into souvenirs. Yet others argued that this was inevitable, that immortality in the modern world is measured not in reverence, but in reach. Tutankhamun had reached everyone, from scholars in universities to children in toy shops, from museum halls to Hollywood. Film's image became universal. Today, a century after Carter lit that first candle and peered into the tomb, Tutankhamun's legacy continues to evolve. The Grand Egyptian Museum, set to be the largest archaeological museum in the world, will house his treasures in one unified display for the first time. Thousands of objects, from chariots to jewelry, from statues to furniture, will tell his story not in fragments, but in full. It will be a monument not only to the Boy King, but to Egypt's ongoing reclamation of its past. For the Egyptian people, Tutankhamun is more than history. He is a bridge between ancient glory and modern pride. Science, too, keeps breathing new life into his legacy. Studies of his mummy have revealed a frail figure plagued by illness, malaria, bone deformities, perhaps even genetic conditions born of royal inbreeding. Far from the godlike ruler once imagined, he emerges as a vulnerable, tragic youth, his very mortality making him all the more relatable. In this sense, Tutankhamun is both myth and man. The golden mask conceals not only his face but his fragility, yet perhaps his greatest legacy is his ability to remind us of the enduring power of mystery. Despite a century of research, questions remain. Was his death an accident, an illness, or a murder? Was his tomb a hurried burial, never meant for a king? Why did his memory nearly vanish from history, erased from records by his successors? These mysteries ensure that Tutankhamun will never truly be solved, never fully understood. He remains just beyond reach, always inviting us to look closer, to question more, to wonder. Tutankhamun's immortality lies not in what we know about him, but in what we do not. He is a riddle wrapped in gold, a whisper from the past that refuses to fade. Long after the cursed stories lose their charm, long after the exhibition's end, the Boy King will remain. For in every artifact, every mask, every carved amulet, there is something timeless, the desire of humanity to remember, to be remembered, to leave behind a story that outlives death. As we close this journey through Tutankhamun's curse, his treasures, and his legacy, one truth emerges. The Boy King was never meant to rule the world in life, but in death, he conquered time itself. His immortality is not measured in battles won or empires built, but in the endless fascination he inspires, century after century, generation after generation. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. The sands of Egypt once buried his name. Today, the world speaks it with awe. Tutankhamun, the boy who became eternal. The shadows of history never truly fade. They linger, waiting for us to uncover them. Every story we tell is just another piece of the puzzle hidden in the dark. If you want to keep exploring the secrets, the mysteries, and the untold horrors of the past, make sure you subscribe to Dark History. Together, we'll dive deeper, uncover more, and never let the forgotten be lost again. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, history has a dark side.